Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight's journey is titled 7 Creepiest Graves Ever Discovered Across the U.S. We return to the quiet edges of the world where the hum of the living fades, and only the wind moves through the graves. These are the stories buried in stone and soil, tombs that whisper, monuments that bleed history, and resting places that refuse to rest. Every account you're about to hear is real, taken from those who've stood before these graves and felt the chill of something watching from below. My goal this month is to reach 4,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers wander in, listen, and vanish into the dark without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a grave or cemetery in your town that truly unsettles you, type its name below. Because when the world sleeps and the soil settles, some things beneath it do not rest. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath and let us begin. My name is Daniel, and I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I've lived here most of my life. Minus a few years, I pretended I was going to move somewhere big and exciting. I ended up back here like a lot of people do. It's not a bad place. It's a small city that feels like a town if you stay in the older neighborhoods. Ones with the narrow streets and the leaning porches, and the trees that are somehow always dropping something. I rent half of a skinny old duplex on a hill with my younger sister Anna from our front porch. If you look straight ahead, you see the cemetery. Calling it a cemetery makes it sound bigger than it is. It's really just a small, old graveyard tucked into a slope across the road, behind a stone wall that's falling apart in a few places. Some of the stones lean at angles like bad teeth. There's a rusted iron gate that doesn't fully close unless you really pull it. When I first moved back in, I thought it might bother me. It's waking up every day and looking at headstones, but it didn't. Honestly, it was kind of peaceful. No loud neighbors over there. Just trees, grass, and a bunch of people who weren't going anywhere. Anna likes it more than I do. She says it makes the place feel historic, which I guess is one way to say old and cheap. She works nights at a nursing home on the other side of town. I do IT support for a regional insurance company in one of those ugly office buildings downtown. So my schedule is pretty normal: up at 7, at my desk by 9, back home a little after 5. She's the opposite. Most mornings when I'm leaving for work, she's just getting home, smelling like coffee and disinfectant. Dropping her bag on the table and kicking her shoes off in the hallway, we fall into a routine pretty fast. I cook more than she does, mostly because I don't mind it and she's wiped out after nights. She takes care of the laundry and keeps track of bills. In the evenings, if she's off, we sit on the front porch with cheap lawn chairs and watch the light go down over the cemetery. There's a big maple tree near the edge of it, and when the wind comes through, you can hear the leaves rubbing against each other, that dry whispering sound. Sometimes there's a dog barking somewhere far off. Once in a while, a car crawls by and you see the headlights slide over the stones and disappear. The cemetery itself is partly overgrown. There's a strip closest to the street that the city still maintains short grass. A little path of crushed gravel that leads from the gate up to a newer-looking monument. But if you look past that, further up the hill, the stones get older and the weeds get taller. Ivy or something like it has crawled around some of the bases. You can tell nobody's visited a lot of those graves in a long time. I always figured most of the families moved away or just stopped coming. People do that. Across the street, we've got a single motion sensor porch light that came with the place. It's one of those cheap ones that flickers when it's cold. The landlord said he'd replace it, but he never did. And after a while I got used to it. At night, when the light comes on, it hits the stone wall and the lower headstones in this pale cone. And everything past that is just dark shapes and tree branches. It never felt threatening. Just a quiet old yard for quiet old bones. There's a little corner store a few blocks down. The kind that still sells lottery tickets behind a scratched plastic shield and calls you hun. Whether you're 18 or 80, the guy who runs it most days is named Vic. He knows everybody's business, or acts like he does. When I mentioned where I live the first time, just making small talk, he said, "Oh, the place by St. Brigid's old plot. Yeah. That graveyard's older than half the streets around here. Then he rang me up like it was nothing. No spooky pause, no warning, just another detail. So that's the setup, I guess. 2 siblings in a cheap duplex, working weird schedules across from an overgrown cemetery that looks nice enough at sunset. For a while, that's all it was. The first weird thing was the gate. I noticed it one morning on my way to work. The iron gate across the street was standing open, just a little, like someone had pushed it and it hadn't swung all the way. I didn't think anything of it. People go in there sometimes. You see older folks putting flowers down once in a while, or teenagers cutting through to get to the next street. The only thing that stuck in my head was that I hadn't heard it. When that gate moves, it squeals. But whatever. I got in my car, drove to work, and forgot about it. Then I noticed it again. A few days later, same thing. I came out with my travel mug and my bag, and the gate was hanging open an inch or two. The wind was barely moving the trees that morning. It was one of those still days before a storm where the air feels heavy. I stood there a second, looking at the gap. Then I told myself it was probably the grounds crew or some kid going through earlier and just not closing it all the way. Logical. Not a big deal. It kept happening, though. Not every day, but enough that it started to feel like a pattern. I'd remember seeing it closed when I got home at night because the light would catch on the bars. Then I'd step out the next morning, and there it would be again, slightly open. Like somebody had just gone in and forgotten to shut it behind them. I never saw anyone go in. I never heard the squeal. It's not a busy street. You'd think I'd notice. Around the same time, I started seeing fresh flowers. Not on the newer graves in the front, those had them. Sure. Geraniums in plastic pots and dollar store flags. But on the older ones up the hill, I'd be sitting on the porch after dinner and my eyes would wander up past the clean rows to the tilted stones in the long grass. I'd see a shape of color there that hadn't been there the day before. White, sometimes red, no vase, just stems tucked against the base of a stone. Cemetery fairy, Anna said when I pointed it out to her one night. She was curled up in the other lawn chair in her scrubs, picking at a piece of chipped nail polish. Maybe some church lady. Yeah, maybe, I said. It made sense. People get sentimental. Maybe someone from the parish came by and did it. It was nice. Even just odd that I never saw anyone walking up there with flowers. You can see the whole lower part from our porch. There aren't a lot of cars to block the view. The porch light started acting up more too. It's a motion sensor, like I said. It's supposed to come on if someone walks up the steps or past the front door, and mostly it did. But then it began firing for nothing, or what looked like nothing. I'd be sitting on the couch watching something dumb on my phone, and the window would flash, and I'd look out and see the beam shining over the wall and the first couple of rows of stones. No cars, no people. Just that empty gravel strip and the wind pushing the branches around. We told ourselves it was a squirrel, or the wind, or some glitch in the sensor. The house is old. Half the wiring buzzes if you plug in more than one thing in an outlet. Things flicker, breakers trip. It's all explainable if you want it to be. It stayed at that level for a while. Small annoying things that you could shrug off. The gate open again. Flowers on another forgotten grave. The light popping on at 3 in the morning when Anna was getting home, making her jump and spill her drink. She'd come in and say, "Your stupid haunted porch light scared the crap out of me again," and I'd say, "It's not haunted. It's just cheap," and that would be the end of it. Then it started to feel less random. I remember one night in particular. Anna had a rare evening off, and we were both on the porch after dark, which didn't happen often because of our schedules. It was early summer, warm enough to sit outside with just t-shirts on, kind of night where the air smells like cut grass and someone's grill a few houses away. There were insects buzzing around the street lamp at the corner, and every now and then a car would go past, and then the neighborhood would slide back into quiet. We were just talking about normal stuff or job. Some annoying ticket I'd had at work when the insects went quiet. I didn't realize it at first. The conversation just sort of drifted, and there was this stretch of silence between us. And I thought, that's weird. It's too quiet. I could still hear a dog way off and a TV from a house down the street, but right around us it felt muffled, I guess. Like somebody closed a door on the sound. That's when we heard the footsteps. They came from inside the cemetery. Up the gravel path, slow, even steps. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Not stomping, just the weight of a normal person walking. They stopped when they reached the place where the path sort of levels off near the middle. We both turned our heads at the same time. The porch light came on with its usual lag, throwing that cone of weak light over the wall and the closest stones. Nobody was there. They talked about calling in someone official before opening it fully, but the damage was already there. Part of the lid had broken under the weight of the soil years ago from the look of it. You could see into the gap. The smell wasn't what I expected. It wasn't rotting, not like anything fresh. It was more like damp wood in old closed-up places. The kind of smell you get in a basement no one's opened in 100 years. I found myself at the edge of the tape without really remembering walking there. They widened the gap carefully. Someone with gloves on pried up more of the lid, just enough to look inside without collapsing the whole thing. More dirt slid in, then spilled out. A few of us leaned forward slightly. I don't know what I thought I would see. Bones, obviously. Maybe cloth, if anything was left. What I didn't expect were the scratches, the inside of the lid. The part that had stayed more or less intact was scored with lines. Long, overlapping grooves, some deeper than others. All clustered in the area where a person's hands would be if they were lying on their back. They ran in different directions, but you could tell from the angles that they were made from inside, upward and outward. There were dozens of them, maybe more. They caught the light in a way that made them stand out against the dark wood. Someone behind me swore quietly. One of the workers said, "Could be from animals," but his voice didn't sound convinced. The coffin had been buried. If animals had gotten in, they would have chewed, not scratched and neat. Desperate arcs, there was a skeleton inside, which you could see of it through the dirt that had fallen in. The bones were mostly intact, but the position was wrong. The arms weren't folded neatly over the chest like in movies. One was bent up awkwardly, as if the person had tried to push upward. The fingers of that hand were close to the scratched lid. The spine had a slight twist, the neck at an angle. They started telling people to back away then. Something about contamination, about letting the right authorities handle it. The crowd shifted, murmuring, starting to break apart. I kept staring for a second longer than I should have. The air felt hotter suddenly, like it was sitting on my skin. On my way back to the house, the cemetery looked different to me. Not drastically, just sharper somehow. The stones that had always blended into the background now looked like points on a map I hadn't realized I was walking through. I went up on the porch and sat down harder than I meant to. My hands felt a little shaky. When Anna woke up later, I told her about it. She listened, eyes half open, hair smashed on one side from the pillow. "So some poor guy got buried alive," she said quietly when I was done. "That's awful. Could have been something else," I said. Ground shifted. Animals, you know. She looked at me for a second. "Yeah," she said. "Sure could have been." Then she rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling. "Do you know who it was?" "I don't think they know yet," I said. "They'll probably look it up." They did, or tried to. A couple of days later, there was a little article in the local paper about anomalies in the historical section of the St. Brigid Cemetery and how experts were being consulted. It didn't say much. Just that an unusual burial had been found and records were incomplete. No names, no mention of scratches. That bothered me more than I expected. I found myself at the clerk's office in City Hall on my lunch break, standing at a counter, asking the woman there if cemetery records were public. She was older, with glasses hanging on a chain. "Some are," she said, flipping through a binder. "Depends what you're looking for." "The older section across from Oak Ridge," I said. "The one they're digging up." "I live right there." "Just curious." She hesitated, then turned and walked into a back room. I heard low voices, a cabinet sliding. When she came back, she had a slim folder. "These are the copies we have," she said. "Lot assignments, some death certificates, not all years." There was a fire in the 70s. I sat at a little table and went through what there was. Faded forms with typed names, dates, causes of death. A lot of consumption, influenza, unknown. I wasn't sure exactly which grave they'd opened, but I tried to match the general area in my head. A few pages in, one entry caught my eye. Last name, Keating. First name, Thomas. Date of interment, 1912. Cause of death, natural causes, peaceful. That word stuck with me, peaceful. There was an address listed too. It looked familiar in that weird way numbers do when you've seen them around. I sat there, tapping the paper lightly, until it hit me. It was our address. Not exactly, but close enough the same lot number, before the property was subdivided. Back when the house was one, something cold ran through me then. Not dramatic, just a slow sinking feeling. I looked up at the clerk. "Do you have more on this one?" I asked. Thomas Keating. She took the paper from me, adjusted her glasses, and pursed her lips. "That's all we've got in this set," she said. "Like I said, a lot of records lost." "Why? Did you know the family?" "No," I said. "The address just looked familiar." She glanced at me, then away. "You people in those houses," she said, half under her breath. "Always coming in about that ground. Just let the dead rest." I started, then stopped. I was just curious. She slid the folder back toward me like she was already done with the conversation. "Well, now you know what we know," she said. "Sometimes that's all you get." That night, the house felt more crowded, even though it was just me. Anna was at work. The wind kept bumping the tree branches against the siding in a slow, irregular rhythm. The porch light clicked on and off a couple of times. I tried watching TV, but I kept losing track of the plot and staring at my own reflection in the screen at some point. I dug out the old deed copy from the kitchen drawer. The name Keating wasn't on it, but there were gaps in the ownership chain. Houses change hands, people die, paperwork gets lost. It's all normal. I kept telling myself that. A man who once lived where I live now died 100 years ago. He was buried across the street. If his death wasn't as peaceful as the paper said, that was an ugly detail from a time when medicine wasn't great and mistakes got covered up. Still, after I turned off the TV and started toward the stairs, I hesitated. The hallway was dark, except for a slice of light from the porch. I could smell the faint dampness coming in through the old wood frame, the way it always did before rain. I heard something creak overhead, just the house settling, I told myself, the way I always did. "Dan," a voice said softly from the kitchen. It was Anna's voice. Same tone she used when she was asking if I wanted anything from the store. I turned, heart thumping once, hard. "Yeah." I said, "You home early?" No answer. The kitchen was dark. I crossed the hall, flipped the light on, empty. Her keys weren't on the hook. Her shoes weren't by the door. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from her saying she was stuck late because someone had called in sick. I stood there with the light humming above me, looking at the scuffed linoleum and the empty sink, and I felt something like embarrassment wash over me. I was tired. That was all. Brain filling in sounds? Houses make noise, and sometimes your mind hooks words onto it. On my way back through the hall, I noticed a faint smear of dirt on the floor, near where the muddy footprints had been before. Just a little crescent of brown by the baseboard, like the edge of a shoe sole. I could have missed it earlier. It could have been there for days. I didn't touch it. In the weeks after they opened that coffin, the disturbances didn't explode or anything. This wasn't a movie. It was more like everything that had been slightly strange took one small step further. The footsteps in the gravel came more often. Sometimes I'd be lying in bed and hear them, that steady crunch. And I'd picture someone walking up the path, stopping in the same place every time. The insects outside would go quiet and then start up again a few minutes later, like someone had walked out of earshot. The sound didn't fade. It just stopped, like someone had been walking and then froze. I remember feeling my skin prickle a little, not exactly from fear, more from the way your body reacts when something breaks a pattern. Anna shifted in her chair and laughed once. "Let's quickly guess your squirrel's bulking up," she said. probably, I said. My voice sounded normal. I got up, walked down to the sidewalk, and looked through the bars of the gate. The gravel path was empty. I could see it pretty clearly. The light caught the white stones and the little bits of glass in it. No one was standing there. No car parked down the road. Just still air and that quiet, pressing feeling. The next morning, the gate was open again. At that point, it had been bugging me enough that I mentioned it to Vic at the store. I didn't go in planning to ask about the cemetery, but I ended up talking about yard work and how we were thinking of trimming the bushes by the porch, and I said something like, might as well. Since we're basically on display to half the dead in town. He laughed at that, then gave me a look. You're over by St. Brigid's old ground, right? He said, yeah. I said, right across from it. He nodded slowly like that, lined up with something in his head. You hearing stuff over there? He asked. It was casual, but it caught me off guard. Not really, I said. Just, the gate and the light and footsteps the other night, probably just animals. He made a face, somewhere between a wince and a smirk. They've been talking about fixing that place up, he said instead of answering. City got some grant. Clean up the old section, reset the stones, that kind of thing. I said, that's good, I guess. He handed me my change and didn't quite look me in the eye. Those graves aren't what you think they are, he said, almost under his breath. Then louder, you tell your landlord to get that light checked. Could be bad wiring. You don't want a fire. I thought about pushing him, masking what he meant, but there was someone behind me in line, and it suddenly felt like I'd made it weird. So I said thanks and left, telling myself he was just being his usual vague, dramatic self. Around that time, I also started going through some of the old paperwork in the house. The landlord had left a folder in one of the kitchen drawers when we moved in, with manuals and a photocopy of the original deed from when the place had been split into 2 units. I'm the kind of person who reads that stuff when I'm bored. The deed had dates from the early 1900s and a couple of names in that old-fashioned script. But nothing jumped out at me. It was just another old house near another old cemetery in a town full of both. The line between the graveyard and the house started to blur in little ways. One rainy afternoon, I came home and found muddy footprints in the hallway. They started just inside the front door. A few smudged ovals leading toward the kitchen, then turning back and stopping near the bottom of the stairs. They weren't boot prints with tread, just vague, flat shapes, like someone had walked in with soaked, smooth-soled shoes. At first, I assumed it was Anna. I texted her, "You forget to wipe your feet?" She replied a minute later, "I'm still at work. Double shift, remember?" I stared at the footprints for a while. The dirt wasn't thick, just a thin, dark film on the wood. It could have been from me, tracked in that morning and dried weird. Or left over from the last tenants. Maybe I'd just never noticed it before. That's what I told myself as I got a rag and wiped them up, following the trail until it faded. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear my name. Not loudly. Not like in horror movies where someone shouts it in an empty room. This was more like the sound of Anna calling from the kitchen while I was in my room, except when I answered, she wouldn't say anything back. The first time was at my desk, playing some game with my headphones off. I heard Dan. From the hallway, just that, short and familiar. "Yeah," I called, rolling my chair back. Nothing. No footsteps, no door. I got up, checked the hall, then her room. The bed was made, the lights off. She was on nights that week. I remember standing there in the dim light from the street, feeling kind of stupid with my hand on her doorknob, telling myself that sound travels weird in old houses. Pipes knock, neighbors talk, TV sets bleed through walls. It could have been anything. The motion light kept picking up movement that wasn't there. Some nights it would go off 3-4 times, spilling that cold cone of light over the stones. I started getting up to check less, because every time I did, it was the same view: empty gravel, leaning stones, the black mass of trees behind them. At some point, you decide you're not going to keep jumping at nothing. You tell yourself it's electrical. You tell yourself you're tired in June. The city finally rolled in with trucks and equipment to start the renovation Vic had mentioned. They posted a sign on the fence about ground restoration and historical preservation, with a little seal and everything. During the day, there were workers over there in neon vests, using ground-penetrating radar, marking spots with little flags, clearing brush. I'd watch them from the porch when I had a day off, sipping coffee and feeling strangely protective of the place. It had been part of my view long enough that it felt like someone messing with the furniture. Anna thought it was cool. Maybe they'll find a lost treasure, she said, or some scandal. Secret lovers buried in the wrong place. Something juicy, I said, or just a lot of rocks. One Saturday, they had an open volunteer thinking up trash, pulling weeds, that kind of low-stakes stuff. Anna was sleeping after a shift, so I went by myself. It felt like a good neighbor kind of thing to do. Plus, I wanted to see the upper part of the cemetery up close, not just from across the street. It was hotter than I expected. The kind of heat that makes the air feel thick and smells like dry dirt and sweat. The workers had set out coolers of water under a tent near the gate. They gave us gloves and trash bags and kind of pointed us to our different sections. I ended up further up the hill, near the older stones, where the grass was taller and the ground dipped in odd little hollows. Up close, the neglect was more obvious. Some of the stones were so worn down that the names were just faint grooves. Others were broken in half, lying on the ground. There were little depressions where coffins had probably shifted or collapsed over the years. I stepped carefully, not wanting to put my weight on any soft spots. At one point, I heard a shout from further up, near the far corner where the tree line began. It wasn't panicked, just someone calling for a supervisor. A few of us looked up, then went back to what we were doing. Stuff like that happens on job sites. I kept picking up old plastic flowers and broken bottles and putting them in my bag. Then someone said, "You guys want to see something?" In that half-excited, half-nervous tone, and more people started drifting toward the corner. Curiosity wins quick in a small group. I followed. There was a sunken patch of ground up there they'd been working on, flagged off with orange tape. One of the ground crews said the radar had shown something odd, so they'd started to carefully dig around it. What they'd uncovered, maybe a foot down, was the top of an old wooden coffin. It wasn't like the shiny ones you see in funeral homes. This was dark, swollen wood with bits of rusted metal where handles used to be. Part of the lid had caved in at some point. They'd cleared around it enough that you could see the shape. One of the supervisors kept telling everyone to stand back, but nobody was leaving. You don't walk away when something like that comes out of the ground in front of your house, you know? That section wasn't on the newer maps, I heard someone say. It might be an older plot. The flowers on the old graves appeared more regularly too. Always fresh. Always on stones from the upper section. One afternoon, I crossed the street to look at them more closely. They weren't store-bought bouquets. Just simple hand-tied little bunches of wildflowers and clover bound with twine. The stems were still damp. I looked around, half expecting to see someone walking away, but the hill was empty. I started keeping the curtains half closed at night because I didn't like seeing the reflection of the stones in the glass. If I woke up to get water and walked past the front window, I'd catch a glimpse of that pale beam from the porch light. The top of the wall, the first row of markers. I began to realize that I wasn't afraid of the cemetery itself. I was afraid of the space between it and the house. That little strip of road, the sidewalk, the front steps, the path something would take if it decided it didn't want to stay on its side anymore. You can laugh at that. I would have a year ago. I still kind of do when I say it out loud. But fear isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the way your hand hesitates on a light switch. I never saw anything outright. No figures between the stones, no faces at the window. The closest I came was one very early morning in late summer, when the sky was just starting to go gray. I woke up before my alarm for no clear reason, with that uneasy feeling you get when a dream slides away too fast. I lay there listening. The house was quiet. No pipes, no fridge humming. Then I heard the gate. Not just the squeak. The clang of it moving, the sound of the latch scraping. That was new. Before it had just been open or closed. I got out of bed and went to the window, parting the curtain with 2 fingers. The porch light came on a second after I moved, bathing the front yard and the wall in that weak glow. The gate was swinging slowly inward, like someone had just let go of it. It moved a few inches, shuddered, and then stopped, hanging open at that same angle I'd seen so many mornings. The path beyond it was empty. I watched for a long time, until my legs started to ache from standing still. Later that day on my way to work, I pulled the gate closed myself. The metal was cold, even though the air was already warm. It shrieked as it moved. The latch stuck twice before it caught. I looked back at our house from inside the cemetery. The porch light was off. The curtains in my bedroom window were drawn. From that angle, the duplex looked older, flatter, like the kind of house that had seen a lot of people come and go without changing much. I don't know if any of this would mean anything to anyone else. Maybe it all sounds like a bunch of small, separate things. A cheap light, bad wiring, old wood, record-keeping errors. Houses settle. People mishear. Towns have history. All I can tell you is the way it added up for me. The way the gate kept opening. The way the flowers appeared. The way the footsteps always stopped in the same place. The scratches on the underside of that coffin lid, right where a man's hands would be. The twisted bones. The word peaceful typed on a fading death certificate. The address that matched mine. The clerk's tight mouth. Vic saying those graves aren't what you think they are, like he'd already regretted the words. I still live in the same house. Rents have gone up everywhere else, and I'm not going to let a bunch of coincidences bully me out of a decent place. Anna talks about moving eventually, but for normal reasons. Better neighborhood, closer to her job. If we go, it'll be because of that, not because of anything across the street. That's what I tell myself. I had the landlord replace the porch light a few months ago. The new one is brighter and doesn't flicker as much. It still comes on by itself now and then. Sometimes I check. Sometimes I don't. They finished the cemetery project. The grass is shorter. Some of the stones have been reset. The upper section looks a little less wild, but not completely tamed. I don't know what they did with Thomas Keating's coffin. The article about the project's completion didn't mention him. When I walk past that part, I can't quite tell which dip in the ground was his. Maybe that's better. People ask sometimes if it creeps me out, living where I do. I usually shrug and say you get used to anything. And it's true mostly. You fold it into your routines. You take out the trash, you answer emails. You mow the little strip of lawn by the porch. Across the street, 100 years of other people just lie there the way they're supposed to. Most nights, before I go to bed, I check that the front door is locked. I jiggle the handle twice. Then I look out through the narrow pane of glass beside the frame. I can see the faint outline of the wall and the top curve of the gate. I just like to see whether it's open or closed. She rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand. It does that. It's probably a squirrel. Come back to bed. It's too cold to stand there. Didn't argue. By morning, I'd convinced myself that she was right. As October went on, the pattern got clearer. The gate would be closed during the day, and then, some nights, I'd glance out and it would be standing open. It's just enough for someone to slip through. The flowers by the older graves seemed to change places. A bunch that had been on a stone by the wall would show up closer to the middle, or vanish altogether and reappear a few days later. Fresher somehow. The motion light started triggering more often, always when it was full dark. Never when the sun was just setting or starting to rise. I kept explaining it away. The wind could push a light gate. Animals move things around. Sensors malfunction. None of it was impossible. The first time I heard my name, I assumed it was a dream. It was one of those nights where you wake up just enough to roll over and then, for no clear reason, you're fully awake. The room was cold, the kind of cold that makes you aware of the tip of your nose. I could hear the baseboard heat ticking faintly, the clock on my nightstand humming. The porch light had come on. I could see a thin stripe of it under my door. Somewhere, very softly, someone said, "Caleb." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even that creepy, honestly. It sounded like someone standing down the hall, trying not to wake the whole house. I assumed it was Hannah. Maybe she'd had a bad dream or needed something. Yeah. I called, my voice sounding too loud in the dark. No response. I waited a few seconds, then pushed the blankets aside and opened my door. The light from the porch cut across the narrow hallway. Hannah's door was closed. I could hear her steady breathing. She was definitely asleep. "Han." I whispered nothing. I walked down the hall, bare feet cold on the wood, and peeked into the living room. Empty. The kitchen was empty too. Just the faint smell of dish soap and the blinking light on the microwave. I checked the deadbolt on the front door. It was locked. The chain was on. I stood there for a minute, one hand on the doorframe, listening. The porch light went off, dropping the window into darkness. The house felt different for a second, like when the power goes out and you realize how many little sounds had been humming in the background. Then everything settled again. By morning, I decided the voice had been part of a dream. Maybe I'd heard Hannah turn over in her bed and my brain filled in a word. That happens. Brains are weird. A couple of days later at the grocery store, I asked the woman at the front desk about the cemetery. Her name's Linda. She's been there as long as I can remember, even back when our family used to come up here in the summers. "Hey, Linda," I said while she scanned my bread and cereal. "Quick question. That grave across from my place, the one with the metal cage over it. What's the story there?" She paused, just for a breath, before she hit the next button on the register. "Old superstition thing," she said. "People had funny ideas back then." "Like what?" "Vampire stuff." I tried to keep my tone light. She gave this tight little smile, not really looking at me. "Consumption. They called it that. Thought the dead could, keep taking from the living. People get scared. They do things." Oh. She handed me the receipt. "You want a bag?" "No, I'm good," I said. "Do we have any records on it? Like in town?" I was just curious. Her eyes flicked up then, sharp in a way I wasn't expecting. "You'd have to ask over at the clerk's office," she said. "They got the old books. Some of them anyway." "Some." I asked. She shrugged, like it wasn't worth talking about. "Things get lost. Floods, fires. You know how it is." On my way out, she added, "Lock your doors. Winter brings all kinds of strange around here." She said it with a little laugh. But it didn't really sound like a joke. The clerk's office is in the back of the brick building that also has the post office. The next day, on my lunch break, I went over. The bell over the door jangled when I stepped in. The place smelled like paper and old coffee. An older man with thinning gray hair sat behind the counter, flipping through a stack of envelopes. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I was wondering if you had the cemetery records," I said. "I'm across from the hill on Ridge Road. Just wanted to know more about some of the older plots." He looked at me for a second. "What for?" I wasn't expecting pushback on that. "I don't know," I said. "Just curious, I guess. We've got that caged grave, and it seems different." Another pause. Then he sighed and got up. "We've got an index," he said. "Lot numbers, names, dates. Some of it's complete. Some isn't. Follow me." He led me to a back room where a few metal filing cabinets leaned against the wall. He pulled out a drawer and thumbed through manila folders until he found one labeled Ridge Sem. He opened it on the table between us. The pages were photocopies of older pages, and some originals, handwritten in dark ink. He flipped through until he found the section that matched the corner where my house sat. "Here," he said, tapping a line with a blotchy finger. "Mercer, email, died." He stopped. There was a gap on the page. The line for the death date was smeared. The ink blurred into a gray stain. I could still see the 18, but whatever came after was gone. The column for notes had a single word in it, scrawled at an angle. It might have been relocated, or reconsidered, or something else entirely. It was hard to tell. "We don't have the rest," the clerk said. "Page's must-off got damaged. Mold, maybe? We had a problem in the basement a few years back. You don't know how he died?" I asked. He closed the folder faster than I liked. "Consumption, I'd guess." "Lots of that, then. People got buried where they lived, more or less. That's all. Do you know why the cage is there?" He lifted the folder and slid it back into the cabinet. "Sometimes families had ideas," he said. You'd be surprised what folks will pay for. Anyway, I've got to get back to work." That was the end of the conversation. I stood there for a second, then thanked him and left. As the door closed behind me, I had the feeling I'd done something slightly impolite. Like asking about an old rumor, people were tired of explaining after that. It got harder to brush things off. The footprints showed up on a Thursday. It had rained the night before, just enough to turn the dirt by our front steps into dark mud. I went out around 9 to get a package from the porch. Our motion light clicked on as soon as I opened the door. I stepped out, bent to grab the box, and froze. There, starting at the edge of the porch and trailing into the hallway inside the house, were muddy prints. They weren't boot prints, not exactly. They were smaller, narrower, like someone had walked barefoot through wet soil and then across our floor. Not full details, just the shape, the ball of the foot, and a hint of toes. There were maybe 6 of them, unevenly spaced. Ending halfway down the hall, where the floorboards creaked the most, "Hannah," I called. A little sharper than I meant to, she appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Yeah, did you come in and out this morning? Without shoes?" She looked down, saw the prints, and made a face. "No, gross. That wasn't me. I've been inside since 7. Did you leave the door unlocked last night?" She shook her head. "You locked it after you did your late call." I remember hearing the chain. We both stared at the footprints. The mud was drying around the edges now, cracking a little as it did. "Maybe it's from yesterday," I said finally. "Maybe I stepped in something and didn't notice." "In your bare feet?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. I went and got the mop. We didn't talk much while I cleaned the floor. The prints came up easily enough, turning the water gray. My hands shook a little, which I told myself was about the cold. That night, the porch light came on 3 separate times while we were watching TV. Each time I muted the show and went to the window. Each time, there was no one there. The road was empty. The cemetery sat quiet in the dark, the iron bars barely visible. When I finally went to bed, I checked the door twice, then checked it again. Deadbolt, chain. I even pulled on it to make sure it was solid in the middle of the night. I woke up to the sound of someone walking slowly down the hallway. 1 step, pause, another step. The familiar creak over that particular board outside my room. My heart started going pretty fast, but I told myself it was Hannah. Maybe she couldn't sleep and was getting water, Hannah. I called through the door. The footsteps stopped. There was a long silence. I could hear the wind faintly, pushing at the side of the house. No other noise. I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. Hannah's door was closed. Light from the street lamp outside seeped through the curtains in a dull strip. I stood there, listening so hard my ears almost hurt. Nothing in the morning. I asked her if she'd been up around 2 or 3. She shook her head, eyes still heavy with sleep as she poured coffee. "My name is Caleb, and I'm from Windsor, Vermont. I rent a small old house on the edge of town with my sister Hannah. It's a 2-bedroom place with slanted floors and thin walls. It's a kind where you can hear the baseboard heat ticking in winter and the pipes complaining when someone takes a shower. We split the rent and the chores. She works early shifts at the diner off Main, and I do remote tech support for a company out of Boston, which mostly means I'm home all day with a headset on, telling people to restart things. If you step out onto our front porch and look straight ahead, it's the first thing you see is the cemetery. The road is narrow, just a strip of cracked asphalt. On the other side of it, there's a low stone wall, and behind that, the town graveyard. It's small, just a few uneven rows of stones sloping up a gentle hill, squeezed between some old maples and what used to be farmland. I got used to it pretty fast. Honestly, it's more peaceful than having a gas station or something across the street. Our town isn't big. There's a hardware store, a grocery, a couple of churches, and the diner where Hannah works. The mountains sit in the distance like a backdrop somebody painted once and never moved. People mostly keep to themselves. You see the same trucks go by at the same times every day. In the fall, there's more traffic because of the leaf peepers, but otherwise, it's quiet. You can hear dogs barking from far off at night, and the trains, and sometimes nothing at all. My usual day is pretty simple. I make coffee, log in for work, and sit at the little desk we shoved by the front window. From there, I can see the cemetery while I'm on calls. The wind moves through the trees and pushes the taller grass back and forth. Sometimes an old man with a red jacket comes and cleans a specific gravestone with a rag. Sometimes a couple of teenagers cut across the yard, probably trying to get to the river faster. Most days, nothing much happens at all. It's just part of the view. The cemetery never felt spooky to me at first. The stones are old, and a lot of them lean, and there's moss on some of the names. The town keeps it mowed, but the edges are overgrown, where the grass grows high and wildflowers creep in. In the evenings, when Hannah gets home, we sit on the porch with our feet on the railing and watch the sky darken over the hill of graves. We leave the porch light on. It flickers sometimes, but that's just how the wiring is in the house. The only thing that really stands out over there is the cage. It's not a big cage. It's not like something for animals. It's more like iron bars welded into a kind of box set right over one grave. The bars are rusted and go down into the ground around the stone, almost like they built a little prison over that one plot. The first week we lived there, I pointed it out to Hannah. "That's kind of metal," she said, squinting at it. Maybe they were worried the guy would get out. She laughed, and I laughed too. It was just a weird old thing in an old cemetery. People did strange stuff in the 1800s. That's what we told each other. Anyway, the small thing started in October, a little after the leaves turned and most of the tourists were gone. Nights got colder. The wind had that sharper edge when it came down off the hill. I'd wrapped up a string of calls one evening and went out to check the mail. It was almost dark, that in-between time when the sky isn't sure what it's doing yet. I heard this slow squeaking noise like metal shifting. I looked across the road. The cemetery gate, just a simple iron thing set in the stone wall, was standing open. I didn't remember it being open earlier. It was moving back and forth a little in the wind, the hinges complaining. The sound was kind of lonely. I stood there and watched it until a pickup came down the road, and I had to step aside. When I went back inside, I mentioned it to Hannah. "Probably the town crew forgot to latch it," she said, kicking off her shoes. Or kids. Kids love that creepy stuff. They're probably daring each other to touch the cage. She said creepy in a joking way, like you'd say about a Halloween decoration. I shrugged. It made sense. I didn't think about it much. A few days later, I was on a late call with some guy in Ohio whose router wouldn't behave. It was past 10, and I had the headset on, half listening to him swear while I walked him through resets. My desk faces the window, but I usually keep the blinds half closed at night, so I'm not just staring into the dark. That night, though, I'd left them a little more open, just enough to see the tops of the stones and the trees moving. As I was waiting for his modem to reboot, the motion light over our porch clicked on. It comes on with a soft hum and a bright white glare that spills over the front steps and onto the road. In my peripheral vision, I saw the light flare and bounce off the stones. The guy on the phone was talking, but my mind drifted. We hadn't ordered food, and there wasn't a car in the driveway. Sometimes the light triggers off raccoons or even falling leaves, but it usually clicks back off after a minute. It didn't, though. It stayed on. "Hey, can you hold on 1 second?" I asked the guy, muting my mic before he could answer. I pushed back from the desk and went to the front window. The light shone over the porch, empty. The road was empty too. Across the way, the cemetery looked washed out and flat under the glare. The gate was shut. The trees were still moving a little, but there wasn't much wind. I stood there watching, waiting for something obvious to reveal itself. Cat, a person, even a big moth. Nothing did. I told myself it was probably just the sensor acting up. Old house, old wiring. I went back to my call. At some point while I was talking, the light went off again, and I forgot about it. After that, it became a sort of background noise in my life. The gate opened one day, closed the next, when no one seemed to have been around. The motion light clicking on and off at strange hours. Little things. We blame the wind or teenagers or the censor. You live across from a cemetery, you expect some weirdness, I guess. One Saturday afternoon, Hannah and I walked over there. It was bright out, the kind of clear fall day where the air feels thin and clean. Gravel crunched under our sneakers as we stepped through the gate. The place smelled like cold earth and old leaves. No one else was around. A couple of small flags fluttered by the newer stones. Birds moved in the trees. We ended up at the caged grave without exactly meaning to. Up close, the bars looked heavier. You could see where they'd been welded together in thick seams. The stone underneath was low and flat. With a name and dates from the late 1800s, the letters were worn but still legible. E. Mercer, Hannah read. God, they didn't even put the full name. There's a year missing here, I said, touching the stone lightly, feeling how cold it was. It listed a birth year and then just D18. The last two numbers were almost completely gone, as if someone had scraped them out. Hannah nudged the bars with the toe of her shoe. They rattled against each other, not as loud as I'd expected, more of a dull clinking. Think it's really welded into the ground? She asked. Pretty sure, I said. Kinda overkill, though. What did they think, that he'd dig his way out? That was a thing, right? Vampire panic or something? I read that somewhere. She grinned sideways at me. Maybe he drank the neighbors. Better make sure to lock the doors, we laughed. But the sound felt a little flat, hanging there in the cold air. I noticed someone had left flowers there recently. Not in a vase or anything. Just a handful of wildflowers laid right at the base of the cage. They were wilted and brown at the edges, like they'd been there a while but not too long. I hadn't seen anyone visit that grave before. On the way back across the road, our shoes left prints in the thin layer of dust over the asphalt. A truck went by, and the driver lifted 2 fingers off the steering wheel in that casual way people do in small towns. Everything felt normal again by the time we were back on our porch. The disturbances stayed small at first. The gate, the light. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like a metal clang. Sharp and short, like someone had hit a pipe with a wrench. It took me a second to realize it had come from outside. I listened, holding my breath. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge and Hannah snoring faintly in the next room. I got up and padded to the front window. The boards creaked under my feet. When I pulled the blind up a couple of inches, the first thing I saw was that the porch light was on. The motion sensor again. It threw that harsh white circle onto the steps, catching a swirl of cold air. My breath fogged the glass. Across the road, I could just make out the shape of the cage over the grave. One of the bars seemed slightly out of line, but maybe that was the angle, or my eyes adjusting. I stared for a long time. The trees barely moved. No sound. Whatever that clang had been, it was over. See anything? Hannah's voice came from behind me, thick with sleep. I jumped a little and turned around. No, just the light again. I didn't tell Hannah about the voice. I did mention the records, though, and the name on the grave matching the name in our rental agreement. Small town, she said, spooning sugar into her mug. There's like, 10 last names here? Of course they repeat, I said. You're probably right. She looked at me for a second. You're letting this cemetery thing get in your head, she said. You're home all day, staring at it. Take a walk in the other direction for once. Look at some trees that aren't full of dead people. She meant it kindly. I nodded and laughed a little. She was right, in a way. I was thinking about it too much. That afternoon I tried working at the kitchen table instead of my desk. The view there is just the backyard and the neighbor's shed. I kept my headset on, clicked through tickets, and tried to focus on people's passwords and software updates. Every so often, though, I'd feel this tug, this urge to go look out the front window. I ignored it until almost 5, when my shift ended. The house was quiet. Hannah was at work. The sun was low, throwing long shadows. I stood up and, without really deciding to, walked to the front room and lifted the blind. The cemetery was there as always. The stones. The trees. The low wall. The gate was closed. The wind moved a few leaves along the ground. Everything looked normal, except the cage door, if you could call it, that was slightly open. I hadn't even realized there was a hinged section until that moment. One of the bars was bent outward a little, just enough to leave a gap. It might have been like that the whole time and I just never noticed. It might have happened years ago. Rust does strange things. Still, my first thought, very clear and simple, is that wasn't like that before. I stood there watching it until the daylight got thinner and the shapes blurred a bit. The gap didn't change. No one came up the hill to fix it. No one walked by at all. That night, I made sure the porch light was on, facing directly toward the cemetery. I adjusted it so the beam hit the cage straight on. Hannah teased me a little, trying to scare off the ghosts. She asked, trying to catch the raccoons in the act, I said. We went to bed. The house settled. The wind picked up a little, making the branches tap softly against the siding. Somewhere in the very early morning, between 1 minute and the next, I woke up with the sharp, simple awareness that I was not alone in the hallway. I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't dreamed anything I could remember. I just knew. I lay there, staring at the line of light under my door. The porch light was on again. I could tell by the color. I listened. No footsteps. No voices. Just the faint, distant sound of a dog barking, and then silence. After a long time, I got up and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The air felt cold again, that specific chill like something had just moved through. The front door was still locked, the chain still on. I didn't go any further than that. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the frame, until my legs started to ache. Then I went back to bed without turning on any additional lights. In the morning, when I finally worked up the nerve to look out at the cemetery again, the gate was open, and the cage, from what I could see through the bare branches, was closed tight. Every bar in place. No gap at all. I've gone over all of this a lot in my head and on paper. There are reasonable explanations for every single part of it, if you break them up. Old records get ruined. Names repeat. Houses creak. Sensors glitch. People talk in their sleep. Rusted metal shifts with temperature. Muddy footprints happen. You can't prove anything from one quiet voice in the dark. I still live in the same house. The rent's cheap, and I work from home, and moving is a hassle. Hannah's talking about getting her own place soon, closer to the diner. I tell her that's fine, that I'll manage. And I will. I'm not scared, not exactly, just careful. Most nights, after I shut down my computer and wash the dishes, I go out onto the porch for a minute. I listen to the wind in the trees and the distant sound of trucks on the highway. Sometimes the insects are loud and sometimes they're not. I check that the gate is closed as far as I can tell. I look for any sign that someone has left flowers or walked across the hill. Then I reach up, adjust the fixture a little, and make sure the porch light is on, shining straight across the road and into the middle of the stones. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Brattleboro, Vermont. I live in a little rented house on a 2-lane road at the edge of town. It's nothing special. 2 stories if you count the sloped attic, small porch, aluminum siding that used to be white before the winters got to it. I share it with my older sister, Jenna. She likes to say she rescued me from the city after my last job went sideways. But really, she just needed someone to split the rent and shovel the driveway. I work days at the hardware store off Main Street. It's one of those places that still smells like fertilizer and cut lumber all year. I do a little bit of everything. There's stock shelves, cut keys, show people which screws they actually need. The job is fine. It doesn't follow me home, which I like. My routine is pretty basic. Open the store at 8, home by 5:30, dinner, TV, maybe a beer on the porch if it isn't freezing. The house sits directly across from a small cemetery. When I say across, I mean if you stand on our porch and toss a rock, you can hit the low stone wall. It's called Riverside Cemetery, which is funny because the river is a good 10-minute walk away, but I guess names stick. The place is old and a little overgrown. Some of the stones lean like bad teeth, and the older ones have that smooth, rounded look from 100 winters. There's a rusted iron gate in the center, and a single gravel path that cuts straight down the middle. When I first moved in, The cemetery honestly didn't bother me. It was almost nice. Quiet trees, a place for your eyes to rest when you looked out the window. In the evenings, the wind would move through the maples and oak trees and you'd hear the leaves brushing each other. Dog walkers cut through there all the time. Sometimes kids rode their bikes along the path, even though there's a sign that says not to. On weekends, I'd sit on the porch with coffee and watch this old guy, Mr. Hanley, walk his beagle between the stones, careful not to step right on the graves. It just felt like part of the neighborhood. Brattleboro itself is small, but not tiny. We have a co-op, a couple of bars, the bookstore everyone pretends is new, even though it's been there forever. The town feels old in a comfortable way. Peeling paint, brick buildings, a church steeple you can see from pretty much anywhere. You get used to seeing the same people at the grocery store, the gas station, the post office. After a few months, I had a rhythm. Work, home, Netflix. The cemetery is a background thing. It might sound weird, but I stopped really seeing it. It was just there, over the road, like an extra yard nobody had to mow. Jenna made more jokes about it than I did. She bartends 3 nights a week and comes home late, so she sees it at odd hours. She'd walk in at 1 in the morning, kick off her boots, and say stuff like, "Here, dead neighbors are real quiet tonight," or, "Do I get a discount on rent for living across from a pile of bones?" That kind of thing. She wasn't scared either. It was just a running bit. The first odd thing was the gate. I usually leave for work around 7:30. The sun's still low then, especially in early spring, and the light hits the cemetery from the side. One morning I stepped onto the porch and noticed the gate was hanging open. Not wide open, just pushed out maybe a foot. I didn't think much of it. Somebody forgot to latch it. Big deal. I got in my car, the gravel crackled under the tires, and I went to work. The next morning it was open again. Same way, not enough to look dramatic, just enough to notice. I remembered it had been shut the night before when I took the trash out. I actually paused and checked that memory. I could picture the black bars closed. Then here it was, cracked open a little. Still, I shrugged it off. Wind, I figured. Or kids. Teenagers go in there sometimes to drink or whatever. It wasn't exactly a mystery. A week or so later, Jenna came home from the bar around midnight and tapped on my door. I was half asleep already. "Hey," she said. "You didn't go in the graveyard tonight, right?" "No," I said. "Why would I?" Gate was open when I got home. Like somebody just walked through. And there were flowers on that cage grave in the back. I didn't know what she meant by cage grave, so the next afternoon, I went to look. It was a day off. I figured I might as well see what she was talking about. The air was cool, but not cold. That Vermont in between where you can't tell if it's still spring or already fall. The gravel crunched under my sneakers as I went through the gate. Up close, the place felt older than it did from the porch. The stones had dates from the 1800s, some from earlier. Names were worn down, letters half missing, lichen in the grooves. There was a faint smell of damp dirt and those little white flowers that always grow where nobody planted anything. The cage grave was near the back corner, by the stone wall that separated the cemetery from an open field. The grave itself was just a rectangle of sunken ground and a small, chipped headstone, but over the whole thing someone had built a low iron cage, like a fence that bent over and met itself on top. The bars were rusted, but solid. Someone had welded them together at the joints. It wasn't very tall, maybe waist high. I'd never seen anything like it. Inside the cage, right in front of the headstone, was a bunch of fresh flowers. Not store-bought wildflowers, clover, a few violets, some tall weeds, twisted together with a piece of twine. They were still wet from the dew. The headstone said, Martha Ellingwood, 1837 to 1889. There was a line under that. But the stone was too worn to read. The cage made a faint ticking sound in the breeze, kind of light metal rattle where the bars rubbed. I stood there for a minute, feeling stupid for even noticing. Someone left flowers. Big deal. It was a cemetery. That's what people do. I went back across the road, stepping over the little strip of ditch, and forgot about it for the rest of the day. That's the thing I keep circling back to. All the pieces on their own were nothing. Our porch light is one of those cheap motion sensor ones. It's supposed to come on when you walk up the steps. It's also really touchy. A car going by too fast will set it off. Wind sometimes. So when it clicked on at odd hours, I didn't think anything of it. I'd see that square of light slide across the front room ceiling and just assume a raccoon had walked by or something. But it kept happening more and more. I'd be in the living room around 10, watching TV, and the light would flash on outside with no car going by. I'd get up, look out the window, see nothing but the road and the dark line of the cemetery. The air outside would be still. No branches moving, no leaves shaking. Sometimes I'd open the door and step onto the porch just to see if something had crawled under the steps. Gravel, road, stone wall, trees. That was it. I'd wave my hand under the sensor and it wouldn't react at all, like it was done with me. Probably spiders, my coworker Mary said when I mentioned it. She works with me at the hardware store, knows way too much about every electrical thing we sell. They like to crawl up in those. Sets them off all night. Just clean it. I did. I took the light down one Saturday and wiped out the little plastic dome, knocked out a few dead bugs, put it back. It still flickered on at random, sometimes 2 or 3 times in an hour. Sometimes it stayed dark when I walked right past it. Around this time, started working part-time at the local historical society too, just on weekends. Brattleboro has one of those old brick buildings, stuffed with dusty binders and framed photos of men with serious beards. All I did was scan documents, label boxes, that sort of thing. It was quiet work. I liked it. They had a whole section on town cemeteries. Old hand-drawn maps, burial records, that kind of thing. Riverside was in there, and one afternoon when nothing else was going on, I pulled out a folder just to see. The map of Riverside was small and simple. Little rectangles for plots, numbers in neat ink. In the back corner, there was a note in the margin. Enclosure, Ellingwood. It was underlined. When I flipped to the index for Ellingwood, I found a short paragraph about a reinterment in 1890. Something. About exhuming a body and placing it in a reinforced coffin at the request of the family. The rest of the sentence had been crossed out in thick pen. You could see where someone had really pressed hard. I squinted and tried to read underneath, shifting the paper in the light. I made out the words public concern and disturbance, and maybe heart, but that was it. A page that should have followed something referenced in a tiny note at the bottom was missing entirely. Just the stub of where it had been stapled. I figured someone had pulled it for a school report years ago and never put it back. When I told Jenna about the cage and the crossed-out note, she liked it way too much. "Oh, it's totally a vampire thing," she said, stirring her tea. "They used to do that. Cage the grave, nail the coffin, whatever. New England vampire? Panic or something?" I watched a documentary about it. "That's not real," I said. "Well, people were real about it," she said. "That's almost worse." She wasn't scared. She was entertained. I didn't want to encourage it, so I dropped it. The sounds started after that. Again, nothing huge. Just enough to notice at night. After Jenna left for her shifts, I'd sit in the living room with the TV low. We don't get a lot of traffic on our road after 9. Mostly, you hear the hum of the fridge, the clock in the kitchen. Sometimes a dog barking way off on the other side of the cemetery. The kind of quiet where you start to pay attention to your own breathing. One night, I heard footsteps on the gravel out front. Slow, even steps. Crunch, pause, crunch. It sounded like someone walking along the edge of the road. I muted the TV and listened. The sound came closer, then stopped, right about level with our porch. I waited for the creak of the steps or the rattle of the mailbox. Nothing. The footsteps didn't go past either. It just stopped. I finally got up and opened the door. The porch boards felt cool under my socks. The motion light did not come on. I leaned over the rail. The road was empty. There were no fresh tire tracks, no car idling somewhere. The wind had settled down and the leaves on the trees above the cemetery barely moved. It was the kind of still air where every sound is sharp. The gravel at the edge of the road looked undisturbed, just the usual mix of dents and scuffs. I told myself it must have been someone cutting across to the sidewalk on the other side and I'd just missed them. Or the sound carried weird from down the block. It's a narrow street. Sound bounces. A couple nights later, as I was falling asleep, I heard someone say my name. It was soft right under the hum of the fan. Caleb. It's that. Not a shout, more like the way someone might try to get your attention quietly. I opened my eyes and stared at the dark. The clock next to my bed showed 12:07. I listened. The house creaked once in that normal settling way. The fridge cycled off. I waited for Jenna to call again, assuming it had been her. She wasn't home. I realized that after a minute, when I heard a car go by and knew it wasn't hers. She'd told me that afternoon. She was working a double shift and probably wouldn't get in until 2. You know that heavy feeling when your body doesn't want to sit up, but your brain is trying to decide if you should. That's what I felt. My heart sped up a little, but nothing dramatic. I just lay there and told myself it was the fan or the wind pushing through the screen, or some phrase from the TV in the other room I'd left on. I got up, turned the TV off, and went back to bed. In the morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream. That was easier than accepting. I'd heard an actual voice in the house. The next person who made it weird was Mr. Hanley, the old guy with the beagle. I ran into him at the gas station one afternoon. He was buying coffee. I was grabbing a breakfast sandwich before work. We recognized each other in that neighbor way. "You're Jenna's brother, right?" he said. His voice always sounded like he'd been yelling at a game the night before. "Yeah," I said. "Caleb, you're in the cemetery house," he said. That's what he called it. "How you liking it?" "It's fine," I said. "Quiet." He nodded and looked past me at the rack of scratch tickets. "You keep that door locked at night?" "Yeah," I said, a little surprised. "Sure, good," he said. He hesitated, like he wanted to say more. "They used to lock the cemetery itself, you know? Not just the gate. Had a chain from post to post. Don't know why they stopped." "Budget, probably," I said. "Town's cheap." He huffed a laugh. "Maybe," he said. "Just don't go wandering around in there after dark is all." I tried to make a joke. "Why? Someone gonna jump out from behind a stone and scare me to death?" His face stayed serious. "Those graves aren't what you think they are," he said. Then he picked up his coffee and walked out. I stood there for a second with my sandwich in my hand, watching the automatic doors slide shut behind him. It was such a strange thing to say. The town didn't have the kind of history where you'd expect mass graves or anything. It was just a small New England cemetery. On my way home that night, I parked in our driveway and couldn't help looking over at the far corner of Riverside, where the cage grave was. The sky was going dark, that blue-gray time just before night. The porch light clicked on with a faint buzz, like it had been waiting. Across the road, the cemetery looked flat and quiet. Still, I watched it for a minute before going inside, listening to the distant sound of a dog barking on some other street not long after that. The line between over there and over here started to blur. One rainy Wednesday, I came home to find mud on our living room rug. It wasn't a lot. Just 3 or 4 faint prints leading in from the front door toward the hallway. They weren't full boots, more like partial marks, where the heel or the ball of a foot had pressed down. I'd been careful earlier. I remembered wiping my shoes on the mat outside, and again on the little rug just inside. I stood there staring at the prints, trying to map them onto what I'd done. Maybe I'd gone back out for something and forgotten. Maybe Jenna had come in and out. When she got home that night, I pointed them out. "You did that?" she said. "I haven't been here all day. I slept at Sarah's." She stepped around the prints like they might smudge onto her socks, then leaned closer. "These don't even look like your boots," she said. "Look how narrow they are." She wasn't wrong. The marks did look off. Too thin, almost like someone had been walking in wet socks. I knelt and touched the rug. It was dry. If the prints had been made with wet mud, it had to have been ours earlier. "I probably just tracked something in last night," I said. "It dried. We just noticed now." "Sure," she said, but her tone shifted a little. She glanced at the front door, checked the lock again without really making a big deal of it, then went to the kitchen. After that, small things went missing and showed up in strange places. My keys, which I always put in a bowl by the door, turned up one morning on the windowsill over the sink, lined up carefully with the edge. Jenna's favorite mug ended up on the porch railing overnight, even though she swore she hadn't brought it out there. The chain on the front door, the one we almost never use, was sometimes hanging open in the morning. Even though we'd started making a point of sliding it across at night, "Maybe you're sleepwalking," Jenna said once. She said it like a joke, but there was a tightness around her mouth. "Maybe it's you," I said. "Doubt it," she said. "I can barely drag myself to bed. Never mind, go rearrange your crap." Inside the house, I started noticing temperature shifts. That sounds ridiculous, I know, but they were real. I'd be standing in the kitchen doing dishes, warm water running, the heat on, and the spot by the window that faced the cemetery would be noticeably colder. Not drafty, exactly. Just a different air. I'd move a foot to the side and feel normal again. Move back, cold. It was like stepping in and out of a shadow that didn't exist. At night, the sounds from outside changed, too. The insects usually made this steady background noise in the warmer months, crickets. Whatever else is out there. One night while I was brushing my teeth, I realized they'd gone silent all at once. No gradual dying down, just an immediate cut. The window over the sink was cracked open, and through it, I could hear the wind pushing through the trees in the cemetery, and then the faint, metallic clink of something moving against something else. It sounded a lot like that cage. I stood there with the toothbrush in my mouth, foam on my tongue, listening. The clinking went on for maybe 10 seconds light, irregular taps like bars nudging against each other. Then it stopped. The insects started up again almost immediately, all at once, like someone turning a dial back on. Raccoons, I told myself. Branch fell, squirrels, anything. I shut the window and locked it. The one thing that really shook me wasn't even dramatic. It was a voice again. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich on my lunch break. Closed the store early for inventory, so I'd come home for an hour. Jenna was on the late shift and had left before me. The house was quiet. Sunlight came in at an angle through the front window and hit the table, turning every crumb into a little speck of shadow. I heard Jenna say my name from upstairs, Caleb. It was the same tone she used when she wanted help with something heavy. Not a shout, not urgent. I heard it as clearly as if she'd been standing right above me on the landing. I put the knife down and wiped my hands on a dish towel. "Yeah." I called, "What?" No answer. I waited, then called up again. "Jen." Silence. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed out front, the gravel popping under its tires. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up. Her door was open. The hallway was empty. I checked my phone just for something to do. I had a text from her from 20 minutes earlier, a picture of the bar's empty taps with the caption, "Pray for me." She was at work, miles away. I went upstairs anyway. Her room was the same mess as always. Clothes on the floor, string lights she never turned on, stacked paperbacks by the bed. No one hiding in the closet, obviously. I checked the bathroom too. Nothing. Going back down. I told myself it was another version of that half-dream thing from before. Maybe I'd been thinking about her and my brain filled in the rest. Maybe the TV downstairs had a line that sounded like my name. The radio from a neighbor. You can explain a lot if you really want to. The thing is, the more you try to explain, the more you start seeing patterns, whether they're there or not. A couple of days after the voice, I was back at the Historical Society, bored out of my mind. I decided to look up more on the Ellingwood grave. It felt like a way to prove to myself that all this was just history and coincidence. People get dramatic about old stories, that's all. I dug into the archives again. The first folder I'd looked at was still missing that page, but there was another box labeled Riverside Incidents. Whoever named it had a bit of flair, I guess. Most of it was boring stuff, complaints about maintenance. A letter from the 1950s about kids tipping stones over. A note about vandalism in the 70s. At the bottom was an older set of pages, brittle and brown at the edges. A town clerk's notes from 1890. The handwriting was tight and hard to read. I sat by the window where the light was. Better one entry mentioned reinterment of the body of Ellingwood from original coffin into a second container placed above the first. It said the original coffin was not to be disturbed further. Per request and in accordance with, and then that line actually trailed off. The next line began notes about chain restraints and herbal measures. Whoever wrote it had underlined the last note, "Do not open again." But the ink had bled in places, and somebody had smeared it at some point. I made out local fears, consumption, and rumors of disturbances at night. There was nothing about vampires or any of the stuff Jenna had joked about. Just this weird mix of medical language and superstition. It's like they'd tried to make fear sound official. I flipped the page over. On the back, in a different, newer pen, someone had written "See property file for Ellingwood House." There was no attached file. Just that note, Ellingwood House. I felt a small, stupid chill then. The kind you feel when you realize your keys aren't in the bowl by the door even though you know you put them there. I went home and pulled out the old manila folder our landlord had dumped on us when we signed the lease. He'd said, "Here's all the old junk the last tenants left. Do what you want with it." We hadn't really looked through it. Menus, appliance manuals, that kind of thing. At the bottom was a photocopy of an old deed. It was half cut off, like someone hadn't lined it up right on the machine. The date was fuzzy, but you could see the outline of 1893. The property description mentioned lot opposite Riverside Burying Ground. Formerly Ellingwood. There was a name on the line where the owner signed hard to read, but the last name matched the headstone across the road. I sat at the kitchen table with that paper in front of me and looked up at the window. The glass reflected part of my face, and beyond it, a slice of the cemetery. The cage grave from that angle, lined up almost perfectly with the window frame. Jenna came in as I was still staring. "You look like you saw a bill," she said, shrugging off her jacket. "Did you know this used to be an Ellingwood house?" I held up the paper. She glanced at it. "Okay," she said. "Is that supposed to mean something?" "That's the name on the cage grave," I said. She walked to the window and looked out. "So, they buried the landlord across the street," she said. "Big whoop. It's the same last name," I said. "And the cemetery notes say they moved her into a second coffin above the first and chained it. And the record says not to open it again. And this house used to be theirs." She watched my face for a minute. Her joking expression faded just a notch. "So you think what?" she asked. "That she keeps walking back and forth because she doesn't like the view?" I almost laughed. It sounded dumb when she said it. I shook my head. "I don't think anything," I said. "I'm just saying it's weird." "Everything in this town is weird," she said. "Go look at the statue of the guy with the fish downtown. You gonna lose sleep over that too?" But she slid the chain across the door that night without me reminding her. The last thing that happened, at least. The last thing I can't file away neatly was a few weeks later. It was late. Jenna was at work. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on low, some cooking show murmuring in the background. When I woke up, the room was dark, except for the blue flicker from the screen. The clock on the cable box said 1:14. For a moment, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. I lay there, listening. The house was so quiet I could hear the faint buzz of the porch light through the wall. I realized it was on. I hadn't heard it click, but I could sense that white block of light sitting just outside the window. Then I heard the metal rattle. It was faint and far off, but there was no mistaking it. The sound of iron bars knocking lightly against each other, not in a steady rhythm, just once, then again, like something testing them. The sound came from across the road. It threaded through the slight seam under the front door, through the glass of the windows, straight into the living room. I turned the TV all the way down. The rattle came again, just once. Then the wind rose, and the trees in the cemetery rustled harder than the ones by our house. Like the air on that side of the road was moving differently. The insects went silent. No gradual fading, just off. I sat up slowly. My heart was beating faster, but I wasn't panicking. I just felt very awake, like my brain had shifted into some alert mode. I told myself it was a branch A raccoon climbing the cage? Anything. Then the porch light flicked off and back on. It didn't fade. It snapped. Dark, light, in 2 quick blinks, like someone had walked directly under it and then backed away. The floorboards in the hallway creaked. Just once. The way they do when someone puts their weight on that one spot by the bathroom. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just sat there and listened, because somehow that felt like the only thing I could do without making it worse. The air in the room cooled, but not everywhere. Just in a line, from the front door to the spot where my feet touched the floor. My skin prickled. I could see my breath very faintly when I exhaled. Just for a second, like fog on a cold morning, even though the thermostat on the wall still said 68. Behind me, by the doorway to the kitchen, I heard my name. Caleb. It sounded exactly like Jenna, tired and a little annoyed. The exact way she says it when I forget to take the trash out. The voice was close, just behind my shoulder. I turned my head slowly. There was nothing there. Just the doorway, the faint outline of the fridge, the little red light of the coffee maker. I didn't get up. I didn't go looking this time. I just sat there with my hands on my knees and let my breathing slow down. After a while, the insects outside started up again, one by one, until the normal night noise filled in all the gaps. The air warmed. The porch light stayed on, steady and bright, throwing that dull square of light onto the living room ceiling. Eventually, I turned the TV off and went to bed. I checked the door twice to make sure it was locked. The chain was across. In the morning, there were small, faint marks on the rug again. Not clear enough to say they were footprints. Not muddy enough to really prove anything. Just a series of slightly darker patches leading from the front door toward the hallway and then stopping. I got down on my knees and pressed my fingers to one of them. The fabric felt the same as everywhere else. I couldn't even say for sure if I was seeing a pattern or convincing myself there was one. Jenna came out of her room, rubbing her eyes. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Nothing," I said. I stood up. "Just looking. We haven't moved." People always ask that when I tell this, if I ever tell it. Why don't you leave? Why don't you move? The real answer is boring. Rent's cheap, my jobs are close, and nothing has actually happened that you could put in a police report. At least that's what I tell myself. The gate still hangs open some mornings. The cage in the back still rattles every now and then when the wind doesn't seem that strong. The records at the Historical Society are still missing that page. Maybe someday I'll find it and it'll make everything sound normal. Or maybe it won't. Most nights are fine. We watch TV. We wash dishes. We sleep. On the nights that don't feel fine, I don't go to the window. I don't look at the rug. I lock the door, slide the chain across, and tell myself that old bones stay where they're put, and that houses are just wood and plaster and air. And every single night, no matter how tired I am, I make sure the porch light is on, facing the cemetery. My name is Caleb, and I'm from Montpelier, Vermont. I've lived here pretty much my whole life, except for 4 years of college down in Massachusetts. After that, I came back, like a lot of people do, and just kind of stayed. It's a small town, tight streets, old brick buildings, the Gold Dome State House, that kind of thing. Winters feel longer than they should, summers are quick and green, and everybody knows at least one thing about your family, whether you told them or not. I rent a little 2-story place on a hill with my older sister, Hannah. She moved back in after her divorce, and it just made sense to split rent and not worry about each other living alone. The house is nothing special. Beige siding, crooked porch, old radiators that clank in the middle of the night. The one thing people always mention is the view. Our place looks straight out over the town cemetery. It's right across the narrow road, down a little slope. You open our front curtains, and it's just stones and trees. The cemetery itself never bothered me. It's small and kind of soft around the edges, like it's slowly sinking back into the ground. The stone wall is broken in a few spots, and most of the headstones lean one way or another. There's this big maple near the middle that turns almost neon red in October. People walk their dogs through there, or cut across it as a shortcut to the grocery store. When the wind moves through, you hear the leaves more than anything else. Honestly, it always seemed peaceful. Quieter than living across from a parking lot. My routine is pretty simple. I work at it for a small insurance office downtown, so I'm out of the house by 8 most mornings. Coffee, toast, check my phone, wave at Mrs. Larson next door if she's out smoking on her steps. I park on the street because our driveway is basically a suggestion. When I come home, the cemetery is right there, usually empty. Sometimes with a couple of kids cutting through, sometimes a guy with a backpack reading something on a bench. At night, if we're watching TV in the living room, we keep the curtains half open. The porch light throws this triangle of yellow across the first few rows of stones. Hannah works evenings at a diner down the road, so we kind of swap shifts. She gets back around 10 or 11 most nights, smelling like coffee and fried food, and we sit by the window and talk for a bit before we go to bed. She's the type who'll point out weird little things like someone doing yoga between the graves at sunset, or a crow that keeps hopping along the same path. She jokes about our neighbors across the street all the time. I roll my eyes, but it's a harmless joke. The cemetery, for both of us, was just part of the view. Weekends are quiet. I do laundry. She catches up on shows. We might walk downtown for groceries. Sometimes if the weather's nice, I'll cut through the cemetery myself on the way back from the store. The gravel crunches under your shoes and you get this mix of damp earth, old leaves. Sometimes a faint smell of lawnmower gas, if the grounds guy has been around. It never felt spooky to me, just old, solid, normal. The first weird thing was the gate. The cemetery has a simple iron gate at the main entrance. Just 2 swinging sections hung off short stone pillars. It squeaks if you move it fast. Most of the time it's left pulled almost closed, not chained, just resting against itself. One Monday morning in early fall, I came out with my travel mug and saw the gate standing wide open. Both sides, straight out. Not just someone walked through, but like someone pulled it open for a parade. I noticed it, thought, that's different, and kept going. I figured maybe the groundskeeper had a truck coming in or something. When I got back around 5 that evening, the gate was closed again. No big deal. The next morning, though, it was open again. Same thing, both sides pulled wide. There weren't any tracks I could see from the street, just wet grass and the same patchy gravel. The sky was that flat gray we get before rain, and there wasn't any real wind. I stood there a second, sipping my coffee, watching nothing, then got in my car and drove to work. You see little things like that all the time. Somebody locked out. Workers. Kids. That night, Hannah brought it up first. She came in, dropped her bag, and went straight to the window. "Did you see the gate this morning?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "Probably the grounds guy." She pushed the curtain back with 2 fingers and looked down at it. It was half dark out, our porch light on. It's the gate back in its usual almost closed position. "I never see anyone going in there except dog walkers," she said. "No truck, no mower, nothing. I get off at 11, and it's just sitting there wide open." "Maybe the city," I said. "Maintenance or something? Twice in a row?" She said, then she shrugged and laughed. "Our neighbors throwing parties, I guess." I didn't think about it much until later that week. When I noticed the flowers, our house is a little higher than the cemetery. So from the living room window, you can see several rows of stones clearly. There's one near the center that always stood out to me. It has a low iron cage over it, like someone laid a metal grate over the grave and pinned it down with thick rods into the earth. The bars are rusted and crooked, and they kind of disappear into the grass in places. I'd just assumed it was some old-fashioned way of keeping animals from digging. You see stuff like that online one Wednesday evening? I was standing at the window while pasta boiled, just zoning out, and I saw something bright at that cage. These small clusters of fresh flowers, bright yellow, tucked right at the base of the bars. You could tell they were fresh, not the faded. Drooping kind families leave after Memorial Day. They were clean, stems still crisp. The grave they were on was from the 1800s. I'd looked at the stone once when I walked through, just because of the metal. I don't remember the exact year, but it was actually worn into the rock how old it was. The next morning, the gate was open again. I pointed the flowers out to Hannah that night. "I guess someone still cares," she said. Kind of sweet in a weird way. "Do you know anything about that one?" I asked. "The cage?" She squinted. "Just that kids call it the vampire grave. Brad at the diner said that. They go down there on Halloween and dare each other to touch it." "That's dumb," I said. "Yeah, but it's kids," she said. "He said something about old vampire panic back in the day. People freaking out about tuberculosis and thinking it was the dead coming back. They'd dig up graves and mess with the bodies. That kind of thing." I stirred the sauce and tried to remember where I'd heard something like that. I'd seen an article once about a grave in Rhode Island or somewhere with iron bars over it. It felt distant, like a different country, even though it was basically next door. "Anyway," she said, "that's what you get for living across from a horror movie set." She nudged my arm with her elbow. "Congrats." "Our rent is cheap," I said. "I'll take vampires if it means cheap." Little things kept stacking up like that. The gate would be open in the morning, closed by afternoon. Fresh flowers would show up at that cage maybe once a week. Sometimes they were yellow, sometimes white. Nobody ever seemed to be there placing them. No cars parked weird, no people standing around. Just new flowers. We started noticing other small stuff too. The motion sensor on our porch light started flipping on in the middle of the night. It wasn't super sensitive before. A car passing wouldn't trigger it, and it took a person actually walking up the steps. But now, I'd wake up at 2 in the morning, see light under my bedroom door, and know the porch light was on. When I checked, there'd be no one there. No mailers, no packages, no stray cat on the railing. It's probably bugs. I said once, half asleep, when Hannah mentioned it at breakfast. "They're not that sensitive," she said, "and it clicks on like clockwork. 1:30, 2:30, 3-ish. I can't tell if I'm waking up because of it, or if it starts when I'm already awake. You're just noticing it more now," I said, "because you're thinking about it." "Sure," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Around that time, I started hearing a sound at night. I thought it was the wind at first, a sort of low humming that seemed to come from somewhere vague, like when someone plays music in a car with the windows up. You don't hear the song, just this thrum. It would come and go. Sometimes it would last a minute, sometimes 10. It was easy enough to blame on the old radiator or a far-off truck on the interstate. One night, though, I was on the couch alone, scrolling on my phone, and it got really quiet in the house. The fridge wasn't running, and Hannah was at work. It's outside. I couldn't hear the usual far-off TV sounds from neighbors. It was just still. Then that hum started, low and steady, and I realized it wasn't inside the house. It was outside. It sounded very clearly like it was coming from across the street. I went to the window and looked down. Our porch light was off. The street light at the corner buzzed a little, but this hum was different. The cemetery looked flat and gray under the sky, stones just darker shapes. I stood there listening, trying to find a pattern. It almost sounded like someone holding one long note, very soft. Not singing exactly, more like, when you press your lips together and let air out. Then just as I thought that, the porch light clicked on behind me. The reflection jumped in the glass, and for a second, I saw myself looking out at myself. When I turned my head, there was nothing on the porch. When I looked back at the cemetery, the humming had stopped. The next day at work, I looked it up, because that's what I do. I searched for humming gravestone and singing tombstone. There were all these stories, mostly local news pieces from other states. One was from Tennessee, about a headstone that supposedly made a low tone during certain weather. They'd found out the person buried there had some kind of metal implant from the 1800s. And people said the stone vibrated in the wind and made it hum. Scientists had recorded a frequency, but they couldn't quite match it to anything. The article mentioned how the sound was louder on full moons. It's like they had to add that in just to make it spooky. I thought about our cemetery. I thought about our porch light coming on right when the humming stopped. I minimized the tab and went back to answering emails. It's easy to explain when you want to. A few days later, I finally asked someone local about the cage grave. There's a clerk at the town office, Mr. Beatty, who's lived here forever. He's the kind of guy who pauses after every sentence like he's sorting through files in his head. I went in during lunch because I needed to drop off some forms anyway. When I was done, I said, "Hey, weird question. Do you know anything about that grave across from Oak Street? The one with the metal over it?" He looked up from stamping something, and for a second I could tell he knew exactly which one I meant. Then his eyes kind of slid away. "Oh, that old thing," he said. 19th century. Couple of families used to do that. Keep animals out. Folks like to make up stories. I heard something about vampire panic, I said, half joking. He pressed his lips together. People got sick. Families panicked. They did things they thought would help. That's old history. Are there records? I asked. Like, about that specific grave? He shuffled some papers. A lot of the old cemetery books went missing when they moved the office in the 70s, he said. Flood damage, that kind of thing. If you want genealogy stuff, the library's better, or the historical society. Could have left it there. But when I turned to go, he added, those graves aren't what you think they are. In this quiet way, like he hadn't meant to say it out loud, I turned back. What do you mean? He shook his head, already looking down again. Folks used to move burials around. Family plots. Sometimes the stone stayed and the body didn't. Don't put too much weight on what you see out there. It should have been reassuring. I walked back up the hill telling myself that most of the stones I looked at maybe weren't even marking anything anymore. Just names. Just markers. Empty dot around then is when stuff started happening inside the house. The first time I noticed the footprints, it had been raining. Not hard, just that steady Vermont drizzle that makes everything smell like wet dirt and leaves. I came home, stepped onto the porch, kicked some mud off my shoes, and went inside. I know I wiped my feet. We're pretty good about that. The floors are old wood. You see everything on them. Hannah wasn't home yet. I dropped my bag by the front door, went to the kitchen, and halfway there I noticed the marks. They were muddy footprints, faint but clear, leading from the back door toward the front window. Not shoe prints exactly, more like the smudged outline of something narrow, as if whatever had walked there had thin soles or was barefoot. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them in a row, slightly turned like someone had stopped to stand in front of the window. I just stood and stared at them for a second. Then went to check the back door. It was unlocked. Not wide open, just unlatched. That bothered me more than the prints, honestly. We both locked that door. It sticks, and you have to kind of hip check it to shut it all the way. I checked the rooms, the closets, the basement, because that's what you do when you're trying to prove there's nothing to worry about. Everything was normal. No drawers open, no windows broken, nothing missing. The only odd thing was Hannah's house slippers. She usually leaves them under the coffee table. They were lined up by the living room window, toes pointing out, like someone had set them there and not used them. I grabbed some paper towels and wiped up the footprints before she got home. I don't know why. I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. When she walked in later, wet from the rain, I watched her take off her boots and hang her jacket. No mud fell. The floor stayed clean. We had leftover soup and watched something dumb. Halfway through, the porch light flicked on by itself. Hannah paused the show and looked over at me. That thing is driving me nuts, she said. Did you mess with it? I'll adjust it this weekend, I said. Maybe it's aimed wrong. She went to the window, peeking out between the curtains. It feels like it flicks on every time I look at that graveyard, she said. Like it's trying to light it up for me. You're just noticing a pattern, I said. That's my go-to line, I guess, yeah, she said, but she kept looking out. Still weird. The next weird thing was the voice. It was a Thursday night. Hannah had the night off, but she'd gone to a friend's place to watch some show. I was home alone, at my desk in the small room we use as an office. It was maybe 9:30. I had headphones on, not playing anything, just sitting there, staring at a spreadsheet, kind of lost in my head. I heard Hannah call my name from the living room, Caleb. It was her normal tone, not scared or anything, just calling out like she'd just come in the door. I heard it clearly enough that I took off my headphones and said, "Yeah." But she didn't answer. I pushed back my chair and walked down the short hall. The lights were on in the living room. The TV was off. The front door was closed and locked. There was no one there. I checked the time. Then I grabbed my phone and texted her. "You home?" She replied almost right away, "No, why?" I stared at the screen for a second, then typed, "Thought I heard you come in." That's all. She sent back a shrug emoji and a picture of someone else's living room. Then, be back in an hour. I told myself it might have been the TV from the apartment below or someone outside. Sound travels funny in old houses. Still, when she got home later, I found myself listening more closely to her actual voice, the way it echoed in the hall. It matched what I'd heard earlier a little too well. Things like that just kept happening. Small and separate at first, then starting to line up. I'd wake to the porch light clicking on and, right after, hear that low humming through the window. Almost like it was answering the light. I'd find the gate open in the morning on days when the flowers appeared at the cage grave. Twice I saw the same stray dog, a yellow mutt from down the block. Flews to walk past the cemetery. It would plant its feet, pull against the leash, and whine until its owner turned around and took a different route. That could be smell or a sound we don't hear. Dogs do that. One Saturday, I walked through the cemetery with a cheap little recorder app running on my phone. I don't even know what I was expecting. I went slowly, reading names, touching the tops of stones to feel how cold or warm they were. When I got to the cage grave, I stopped. The stone underneath the bars was hard to read from the street, but up close I could make out most of it. The last name on the stone was the same as my landlord's. That hit me in a stupid way. It's not even a rare name around here, but seeing it there, carved into old granite with dates from the 1800s, made my stomach feel odd. Under it, you could just barely read something about consumption and taken too soon. I couldn't see any mention of the metal or anything like that. The bars themselves were welded together in this rough way. Not pretty, just functional. They looked like they'd been added after the burial. When I played back the recording at home later, all I heard was wind, my own footsteps, and once a truck going by. No humming, no whispers. Just the normal fuzz you get when you record outside. That same evening, Hannah brought home an old folder from the diner. One of her regulars, an older woman who volunteers at the Historical Society, had heard she was living across from the cemetery and thought we'd get a kick out of some local lore. We spread the papers out on the coffee table. They were photocopies, mostly newspaper clippings, and notes in ballpoint pen. There was one article from the late 1800s about exhumations in Worcester County or something like that. It talked about families digging up their dead, cutting out hearts, burning them, drinking ashes, all because they believed someone was being drained by a vampire. The article didn't use the word in the movie sense, but it was there. "Gross," Hannah said, flipping past it. "People are insane." Another page was a handwritten note from someone at the Historical Society about our cemetery specifically. It mentioned that a group of graves on the north side had been disturbed around that time. The bodies were examined, and at least one coffin was reportedly found with iron bars welded across the top to prevent egress. Really used the word egress, she said, snorting. Imagine being that scared. Near the bottom of the page, there was a name that matched the one on our cage grave. I noticed, too, in passing, that another Naaman, one of the possibly disturbed graves, was very close to ours. Same last name, same initial for the first. The last few letters were smudged. Family. She asked. "Could be," I said. "This town's full of us. We didn't get through all the pages. Some of the copies were half cut off, or the ink had faded. We left them in a stack on the table and put on a movie to clear our heads. The next morning, came downstairs and found the folder open again. It was turned to a different sheet I hadn't read yet. A typed thing about renumbered plots and empty stones. A sentence halfway down caught my eye. Later surveys suggest several headstones do not correspond to existing remains. The thing that bothered me was stupidly small. I know I'd left the folder closed. I remember tapping it straight and setting the remote on top. Now, the remote was on the couch, and the folder was open to that one page. like someone had been looking for it. I called out to Hannah and asked if she'd been reading more last night. "No, it crashed," she said from upstairs. "Why, nothing," I said. "Just wondering." Around then, I started having trouble keeping all my explanations neat in my head. Each thing by itself made sense. Gates open and close, people leave flowers. Old wiring flicks lights on. Sound travels weird. Dogs get spooked. Names repeat in families. Papers get shuffled, but together, they didn't sit right. It felt like standing on a floor that looks solid but dips a little when you walk across it. Not enough to make you fall, just enough that you feel it in your knees. A couple of weeks later, near the full moon, not that I was tracking it, but Hannah mentioned it, the humming came back stronger. We were both home, sitting in the living room. It was late, close to midnight. The TV was off. We weren't doing anything special, just scrolling our phones in that way where time stops meaning anything. Outside, the street was empty. No cars, no people walking dogs. The hum started as this faint vibration, almost like someone had turned on a distant generator. It grew slowly, layer by layer, until I could feel it in my chest more than I could hear it. Hannah lowered her phone and looked over at me. "Do you hear that?" She said. "Yeah," I said. "Probably a truck on the highway." "There's no highway that close," she said. "Not that loud." We sat there listening. It wasn't coming from the fridge or the walls or upstairs. It was outside, under everything. A long, steady note. "Maybe it's the stone," I said. Before I realized that was exactly the type of thing I didn't want to say. "The what?" she asked. I sighed. "I read about this singing tombstone thing in Tennessee. There was some metal in the coffin, and the wind made it hum or something. People made a big deal out of it." "Okay, but there's no wind," she said. She was right. The air outside looked dead still. The trees in the cemetery weren't moving. Our porch light was off. The hum kept going. "I'll check it out," I said, because that's what the rational person does in these stories, right? They go look, and it's always just a pipe or whatever. I stood up and walked to the window. As I reached for the curtain, the porch light clicked on by itself. I winced, not because it was bright, but because it felt timed somehow. Like it had been waiting. The light spilled down over the first row of stones, then the next. It didn't reach the cage gravets farther back, but it made the path through the gate shine pale. The gate itself was closed, the bars catching the light in a thin line. The hum kept going, steady and low. It sounded, from where I was standing, like it was coming directly from the direction of that grave. I told myself I was just lining things up in my head. You hear about a singing stone, and suddenly every noise has a source. Is it louder? Hannah called from the couch. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe." I watched for a while, waiting for some obvious explanation. A car coming, a neighbor opening a window, something. Nothing moved. The cemetery was just a blacker patch of black dot then. Very slowly, the hum started to fade. It didn't cut off. It just stepped down, like someone turning a knob. When it finally stopped, there was a second where everything felt too quiet. Even the little buzz from the porch light sounded sharp right then. With that silence ringing in my ears, I heard a voice behind me in the room. Say my name. Caleb. It was soft and close, right at my shoulder level. It sounded like my own voice, actually, but a little off. Like when you hear yourself on a recording and it's not what you expect. I turned around so fast I almost tripped on the rug. Hannah was still on the couch, staring at me, eyes wide. "You heard that right?" She said. "Yeah," I said. My throat felt tight. "I guess the TV upstairs." "There is no TV upstairs," she said. I'm kind of done pretending this is all nothing." She stood up and walked over to me, but she didn't go all the way to the window. She stopped halfway, like there was some invisible line there. "We should move," she said, half joking, half not. "We can't afford to move," I said. That was the most practical thing I could think of. She laughed in this short, breathless way. "Yeah, I know. I know." That night, when I finally went to bed, I locked every door twice. I checked the windows. I turned the heat up just to make sure the cold I felt wasn't from bad insulation. Lying there in the dark, I could hear every creak in the house. For the first time since we moved in, I wished our front window didn't look out over the cemetery. The last thing that happened, at least, the last clear thing, was small. It felt like a conclusion, even though it really wasn't. It was a couple of days after the humming. I had taken the morning off to deal with a plumber, so I was home at 9, which I usually wasn't. The plumber was in the basement, swearing at an old pipe in a very reassuring, normal way. I made coffee and, out of habit, glanced out the front window. The gate was open again, both sides pulled wide. That wasn't surprising. What caught my eye was a figure standing near the cage grave. Not right next to it, but close enough that I knew which stone they were facing. It was a man in a dark jacket, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed like he was reading. From where I stood, I couldn't see his face. He wasn't carrying flowers or anything. He was just standing there. It struck me weirdly that this was the first time I'd actually seen someone at that specific grave. We'd had all these signs that someone cared about it, the fresh flowers, the cleared grass, but never an actual person. I watched for maybe 30 seconds. He didn't move, didn't shift his weight, didn't turn. It was like he was fixed there. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked away to check it, just a text from my boss asking if I could log in later, and when I looked back up, the man was gone. The gate was still open. The cemetery was empty. You know how sometimes the smallest thing will tip you over from this is all fine? 2, I can't shake this. That did it for me. Not because he vanished or anything dramatic. I know there are 100 ways he could have walked away when I wasn't looking. The thing that stuck with me was that I hadn't heard any footsteps on the gravel. No crunch, no sound, nothing. Later that afternoon, I found our landlord's number in the folder of old emails and finally called him. I asked as casually as I could if he knew anything about the history of the house. People always say you should ask that before you sign a lease, but no one really does. He hesitated. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Old place, he said. I've been in my family a long time. My great-great something built it. Back when that cemetery was smaller? I asked. Yeah, he said. They expanded it in the late 1800s. Before that, these houses were farther from it. Kind of just a field between. Why? No reason, I said. Just curious. My sister and I were going through some historical stuff. He cleared his throat. You seen that cage stone yet? Yeah, I said. That's one of mine, he said, and his voice went flat. Same line. Guy got sick. Folks panicked. Stories get exaggerated. People think they know what's under those bars. He paused, then added, almost to himself. Most graves out there aren't where they're supposed to be anymore. Anyway, I thought of what Mr. Beatty had said. Those graves aren't what you think they are. What do you mean by that? I asked. You ever notice how your front room is colder? He said instead. Even with the heat up. Old houses, man. Air just goes where it wants. He wouldn't say anything else. We hung up and I stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the plumber still banging around downstairs. The most normal sound in the world. That night, I pulled out the old folder and went through every page. I don't know what I was looking for. Proof. A sentence that would make everything click into place. I found a diagram of the original cemetery layout and, next to it, a note about relocated remains and reused stones. Saw a street mentioned once. In passing, as part of an expanded burial boundary that was later reduced again. Someone had crossed that sentence out in pen, at the bottom of another page, in handwriting I didn't recognize. There was a line, "Not every stone marks where the body lies." I sat back on the couch, the paper in my hand, and listened. The house was quiet. The porch light was off. There was no humming, no footsteps, no voice. Just the fridge cycling on and off, and the faint sound of a car somewhere far away. I've thought about moving a lot. So has Hannah. But every time we look at listings, the prices slap us in the face. We always come back to the same place. It's just a house, across from just a cemetery, full of old names and older fears. People lived here before us and we're fine. We've been here 2 years. Nothing has touched us. Nothing has actually happened. Not really. Still, I notice patterns now. The gate is open more mornings than it's closed. The flowers at the cage grave are never wilted for long. The porch light comes on, sometimes when no cars go by. Every so often, late at night, the house goes very still. And for a second, I feel like something is standing in that front room, in the colder air. Looking out over the stones the way we do, I haven't heard the voice again. Not clearly, anyway. Sometimes I think I hear my name in the radiator hiss, or in the wind between the house and the wall. I tell myself it's nothing. I remind myself that bones get moved, stones stay put, and stories grow around empty spaces. I remind myself that I'm logical and grounded, and not the kind of person who believes in things without proof. But most nights, before I go to bed, I still walk into the living room, check the lock on the door, and glance out across the road at the dark shapes on the hill. And no matter what the weather's like, I still leave the porch light on facing the stones. My name is Laura, and I'm from Bennington, Vermont. I moved back a couple of years ago after spending most of my 20s bouncing between shared apartments around Boston. I didn't plan on coming back, honestly. It just kind of happened after my mom got sick, and then by the time things settled, I already had a job here and a lease. It's not dramatic. Life just folded back in on itself, and I ended up in the same town where I learned to drive and where everybody still remembers what you did in high school. I live with my younger brother. Evan, he's 26, works nights at the distribution center off the highway, and plays guitar in a band that only seems to play one bar in town. We rent the top half of an old white house on a little hill. Our landlord lives out of state. The downstairs place is empty. The paint is peeling, the porch sags a little, and the floors tilt if you roll a marble across them. It's not fancy, but the rent is low, and we don't bother each other much. My schedule is pretty normal. I work at a small insurance office near Main Street, just past the post office. I'm up at 6 most mornings. I make coffee, scroll through my phone in the kitchen, and then I sit on the front porch for 10 minutes before I get ready. That's my one little quiet habit I've held on to from the city. Just coffee and empty air before I have to talk to people. From the porch, you see the cemetery. That's the main view. The house sits on one side of a narrow road, and the cemetery spreads out on the other, sloping down and then back up again, with old stones leaning in every direction. Some of the stones are almost swallowed by grass and little white flowers. There's a low stone wall along the road and a simple iron gate. In the evenings, when the sun is low behind it, the whole hill just looks soft and kind of peaceful. I didn't think twice about it when we signed the lease. Evan thought it was cool. The cemetery's not big. It's an old town plot, the kind that just grew over time instead of being designed. The newer graves are up toward the top, with smooth gray markers and little American flags. The older ones are down near the road, thin and crooked, with names worn down so far you have to squint. In summer, the wind pushes through the maple trees and makes the leaves hiss. And you can hear gravel crunch when someone walks the main path. A lot of dog walkers cut through there. Kids do too, on their way to school. It's just part of the neighborhood. Bennington itself is quiet in a way I didn't really appreciate until I left and came back. There's the strip of older brick buildings downtown, the diner that opens at 5, the new coffee place that everybody complains about but still uses, and then just a lot of small houses, porches, and pickup trucks. At night, you can hear dogs barking from way across town, especially in winter when the air is sharp and thin. Traffic dies down after 9. The loudest thing is usually the plow trucks, or someone gunning it up the hill after leaving the bar. For a while, everything just felt normal. We joked about living across from the cemetery when friends came over. Evan would lean on the porch railing with a beer and tell people, "Free neighbors, no complaints," stuff like that. People would laugh, look across at the dark shapes of the trees, and then go back to whatever game was on. It never felt spooky, just cheap rent with a weird view. The first weird thing was the gate. There's that iron gate at the front, the one with a simple latch. During the day, it's always standing open. But every night, the town guide, I think, comes by in his truck and closes it. I know because I've seen him do it from the porch around sunset. He gets out swings it shut till it clicks, nods at it like he's satisfied, and drives off. Then a few times a week, I'd be leaving for work in the morning, coffee in one hand, bag in the other, and the gate would be standing open again. No latch, no half-closed thing, just wide open. It didn't strike me as anything at first. I figured some early dog walker opened it, or someone came to put flowers on a grave. Doors and gates get used. That's what they do. One evening in late spring, I was on the porch when Tom closed the gate. I watched it happen. He waved at me. I waved back. No one else walked by. It wasn't windy. Later that night, around 10, I stepped out to bring in a sweatshirt I'd left on the railing. The road was empty. The air smelled damp and a little like mud because it had rained earlier. I looked across the street without really thinking about it, and the gate was standing open. Not halfway. All the way. I remember frowning and then telling myself I'd probably just misremembered. Maybe I'd seen him drive past, not actually latch it. You notice something, and your brain fills in the rest. It bothered me just enough that I mentioned it to Evan when he got home around midnight. Maybe it's on a timer, he said, kicking off his boots. Like electric. Old school Vermont smart gate. It's iron, I said. There's no motor, he grinned. Then it's a ghost. Problem solved. He always goes straight for that. That's just him. Around that time, we started noticing fresh flowers on one of the older graves near the bottom of the hill. I only noticed because it was right in my line of sight from the porch. The stone itself is low and thick, with one of those rusted iron railings around it, kind of like a cage sunk into the ground. For most of the winter, it looked forgotten. Just brown grass, old snow, and a few dead stems. Then, one week there was a jar with 3 white carnations sitting right in the middle. I thought that was nice. Some descendant finally got around to visiting, I told myself. The flowers wilted, and I watched them slump day by day while I drank my coffee. A week or 2 later, there were new flowers. Little yellow ones this time, in the same jar. The jar itself never moved. Just the flowers changed. "You're really tracking this grave, Evan?" said one night, leaning over my shoulder. "You got a crush?" "I just notice it," I said. "It's right there." "Maybe it's that iron vampire thing," he added. "What do they call those? Cages? Grave cages?" "Please don't start," I said. He laughed and dropped it. That's the kind of teasing he likes. Say something creepy. Then binge a sitcom and forget it. There were sounds too, but sounds are easy to explain. Our street's not busy, but you still get cars, and sound carries weird on the hill. Sometimes at night, lying in bed, I'd hear what sounded like soft footsteps on gravel. Not marching footsteps. Just a slow crunch, pause, crunch, like someone walking the path along the lower stones. I'd hold my breath for a second, waiting for a car door or a dog collar or something. Usually I'd hear nothing else. Sometimes there'd be a little gust of wind afterward and a leaf would scrape somewhere. It all blended together. One night, though, I could have sworn I heard my name. It was late. Evan was out playing a show. I was in bed scrolling through my phone, porch light on, curtains half open so I could see that dull yellow glow. The house was quiet. There's a certain silence in winter when the furnace has just kicked off and you're waiting for it to start again. It was that kind of silence. I heard the soft crunch of gravel once, then again. I froze, mostly because I didn't want someone drunk wandering around out there. Then I heard what sounded like a low voice. Not loud, not clear, just a murmur that rose and fell, and in the middle of it, there was a shape of sound that landed exactly where my name sits in my brain. Laura, not sharp, not a shout. More like someone trying out the word and letting it roll away on the wind. I sat up and listened hard. Nothing. Just the hum of the fridge. In the kitchen and the faint tick of the wall clock in the hall. I told myself it was a neighbor, a street over, or maybe someone out walking their dog late and talking on the phone. Wind pulls some syllables and throws away the rest. It happens. Still, the next day at work, I found myself telling one of my coworkers, Kim, about the gate and the flowers and the voice. I kept it light, made fun of myself halfway through. She just raised her eyebrows. "That cemetery gave me the creeps when I was a kid," she said. "My grandma used to tell us not to play near the lower stones. Said they were, I don't know, special. Special how?" I asked. "She never explained," Kim said. "Old people stuff? You know how they are. You ask a question, and they just say, 'Never mind,' and send you to get more potatoes." We laughed, and then a client came in, and that was that. Around early March, little things started repeating. That's what made me actually notice them. The porch light is motion sensor. It's one of those cheap ones that the landlord installed years ago and never updated. It points straight toward the cemetery gate. Normally it just clicks on when we step outside or when a car pulls up. But over a couple of weeks I started catching it flipping on with no one there. I'd be washing dishes, look up, and see the front of the house go bright. The light spills across the road and catches the first couple of rows of stones, so you see them throw these little long shadows. I'd walk over to the window, expecting to see a person or a dog. Nothing. No car, no deer. Just still stones, and that open gate. Probably a cat, I told Evan when he mentioned it. Or a ghost, he said. Thin ghosts. Like calorie-conscious ghosts that don't show up. I rolled my eyes. It's a motion sensor. "It's touchy." "Yeah," he said. "It's touching the dead." Thought he was hilarious. One Saturday, when the weather was finally decent, I walked over there during the day. I told myself it was just because I wanted some air, and my usual walk loop was muddy. The gate stood open, as always, now that winter was almost over. The gravel path felt firm under my sneakers. Somewhere a crow made that rattling sound they do. The air smelled like wet leaves and old stone. It's all normal. I found that grave with the iron rail around it. Up close, the cage was just a set of thick bars welded in a rectangle around the head of the coffin area, sunk into concrete corners. Rust had eaten through in spots. The stone inside the railing was flat and dark, with a name I could barely read and a date in the late 1800s. Someone had set a clean glass jar in the middle, with a bunch of pink flowers this time. Their stems were cut short and neat. There were no footprints in the dirt around it. On the way back, I bumped into our neighbor from farther down the road. Mr. Godwin, he's in his 70s, walks his dog Daisy up the hill every afternoon. He slowed when he saw me looking at the stones. "Nice day for a visit," he said. "Yeah," I said. I was just stretching my legs. He glanced over my shoulder toward the lower section where I'd been. "That part stays wet longer," he said. "Ground doesn't drain as well." "It's pretty," I said. "Old?" He nodded, then tugged a little on Daisy's leash. "Old is one word for it," he said. "You take care now, Laura." My name very clearly. I almost asked him about the iron grave. But you know how you get that little feeling that you'd be crossing some line? Like bringing up a family fight at the wrong moment? I swallowed it and went home instead. A week or so later, I had to stop by the town office on my lunch break to drop off some paperwork for the landlord. There's a little room off to the side where they keep maps pinned up and stuffed into flat drawers, parcel maps. Old zoning stuff, the kind of things nobody looks at unless a fence is in the wrong place. While the clerk, Ms. Davis, made copies. I wandered over and started flipping through a binder marked cemetery plots. The pages were photocopies of hand-drawn maps. Each section had little rectangles for burials, with family names written in careful script. I found our cemetery easily. The outline is pretty distinct. The newer rows were all neat. The lower part, near the road, looked like someone had sketched it after the fact, filling in names where they could. There were notes like "stone fallen" and "name worn." Near the bottom edge, there was a box drawn a little darker than the others, with a faint note, "caged coffin, scumed, reinterred." The last name next to it matched the one on the iron grave, though I'd have to squint to say it out loud. The first letter was maybe a B or an R. It blurred in photocopy static. I flipped to the next page to see if there were more notes, but that section was blank, and the page after that was missing altogether, just torn out. The next available page. Jumped to a different cemetery on the other side of town. "You shouldn't be looking through that," Ms. Davis said behind me, not unkindly, but a little too fast. "Oh," I said, pushing the binder closed. "Sorry, I was just curious. It's out of date, she said. She set my copies down and put her hand on the binder like she might take it away. A lot of errors in there. We're doing a proper digital record now, I smiled. I live across from the old cemetery. I was just wondering about it. Her face softened again, but only a little. Those lower stones, a lot of them were moved around when they widened the road, she said. So what's on paper and what's in the ground? It doesn't always match up like wrong names, I asked. She shrugged. Records get messy. Anyway, here you go. She slid the papers toward me, then added, You enjoying the place? Yeah, I said. It's quiet. Quiet's good, she said. Quiet means everything's where it should be. When I got home that night, Evan was at the kitchen table, shoving pizza into his mouth and watching some video on his phone. I told him about the binder and the caged coffin note. He grabbed his laptop and started searching while I finished my slice. Okay, said after a few minutes, turning the screen toward me. I'm not saying this is your guy, but listen to this. 19th century New England vampire panic. People thought tuberculosis was caused by the dead eating the living. They dug people up, took out organs, stuff like that. He scrolled down but didn't show me the pictures, which I appreciated. See, he said, they'd sometimes put bars over graves to keep them from getting out. He did finger quotes, of course. That's nice, I said. I tried to sound bored, but it's just a grave. They probably ran out of normal fences. Evan grinned. Sure, totally normal to cage grandma. It's Vermont, I said. People do weird things with metal. That was my last serious attempt at brushing it off out loud. Inside my head, I was already fitting things together in ways I didn't like. But I kept telling myself, people used to panic about stupid things. They'd burn their own furniture if someone said it kept disease away. That doesn't mean anything now. The dead stay dead. That's the rule. The line between the cemetery and the house started blurring in small ways after that. One rainy Tuesday night, I came home alone. Evan was on a late shift. The road was slick, reflecting the streetlight at the bottom of the hill. I remember noticing how loud the rain sounded on the windshield. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light clicked on. I grabbed my bag, ran through the rain, unlocked the door, and shook off my jacket in the entryway. I toed off my shoes like I always do and kicked them aside on the little mat. When I came back from the kitchen with a glass of water, there were muddy footprints on the floor. They started just inside the door where my own damp socks had stopped. But the prints themselves weren't mine. They were bare. You could see the shape of toes, the curve of a heel, a darker patch where the arch hit the floor. They went in a straight line down the short hallway and stopped near the front window that overlooks the cemetery. Not at the couch, not toward the bathroom, nowhere else. Just front door to window, and then nothing. It wasn't a lot of mud, just enough to be obvious. My first thought was simple. I tracked something weird in on my socks, and the pattern was just my brain making shapes out of it. So I went and got paper towels and cleaner and knelt down to wipe it up. Up close, though, it still looked like a footprint. A narrow one. I pressed my own foot next to it for comparison. Mine was longer. Avan's would have been even bigger. Okay, I said out loud, because sometimes hearing your own voice makes you feel less stupid. Maybe it's from before. Maybe Evan came in wet and forgot to wipe. I texted him a picture. You track mud in here and don't clean it? He wrote back half an hour later. That's not mine. I've been at work since 3. I stared at the little bubble on my phone where his message sat. I looked at the streak of brown, still faintly coloring the boards even after I'd wiped. Then I locked the front door again and checked the back door, just because. I didn't sleep great that night. A few days later, I was in the bedroom folding laundry. I heard Evan call my name from the living room, Laura. His voice was clear, close. Yeah. Nothing. I finished the shirt I was folding and walked down the short hall. The living room was empty. TV off. Couch empty. The front door was closed and locked. I grabbed my phone and called him. He picked up over some background noise drums, people talking, the clink of glasses. What's up? He said, Where are you? I asked. At O'Malley's we're setting up. You didn't just come home? He laughed. I wish. We don't go on for another hour. Never mind, I said. Bad cell echo. I heard your voice, I guess. "You okay?" He asked. "Yeah," I said. "I'm fine." I hung up, walked back down the hallway, and stood by the front window looking out. The cemetery lay across the road, gray and quiet in the late afternoon light. A little wind was moving through the trees. The gate was closed. I checked both locks again before bed. After that, objects started showing up in the wrong places. Nothing dramatic. Just keys left on the front windowsill instead of the hook. The remote set carefully on the arm of the couch, facing the cemetery, when I knew I'd left it on the coffee table. Once I found the porch light switch flipped on in the middle of the day, I was pretty sure I'd left it off. Every time there was a reasonable explanation, Evan moved it. I forgot. People misplace things all the time. Houses creak, lights flicker, drafts happen. I repeated those thoughts until they smoothed out in my head. Still, I started noticing the temperature change near the front of the house. You'd walk from the kitchen, which was always a little warm, into the living room, and the air would feel flatter, cooler, not freezing, not like a movie, just enough that the skin on your arms noticed. Right in front of the big window, it felt colder again. Even when the glass wasn't drafty and the heat registers were working, one night in early April, I woke up for no real reason. The digital clock showed 3:12 a.m. I had that dry mouth feeling from sleeping with my mouth open. I almost rolled over and went back to sleep, but something made me listen. The house was so quiet, it felt like the silence had weight. No furnace rumble, no fridge humming, nothing. Then very softly, I heard iron rattle. It sounded small, not like a gate slamming, more like metal bars shifting against each other, enough to make a faint clink. It came from the direction of the cemetery, through two walls and across the road, but somehow I knew what it was. It happened once, then again, then stopped. The porch light clicked on. I saw its glow seep around the edges of my bedroom curtains. I lay there staring at the ceiling. My heart was pounding, but the rest of me felt weirdly calm, like my body had decided not to move at all. I could hear the blood in my ears and nothing else. No cars passed. No dogs barked. Even the insect noise that usually whines late in the season was gone. Just the light on and that echo of metal in my head. A moment later, soft as a breath, I heard my name. Laura. Oh. It came from the hallway near the living room. Not loud, not even clear. Just the shape of my name, low and patient, and then a kind of exhale. I didn't get up. That's the honest truth. I didn't go look. I stayed in bed, eyes open, listening so hard I gave myself a headache. After a while, the porch light clicked off. The furnace kicked on. The normal sounds came back, thin and small. In the morning, nothing was out of place. No footprints. No unlocked doors. I made coffee and sat on the porch like I always do, watching the steam rise from the mug and drift away. The cemetery looked exactly the same. The gate was open. The jar on the iron grave held a new bunch of flowers. White this time that day. Instead of going straight home after work, I went to the library. It's a small building, kind of cramped, with that quiet carpet smell and old heating. The librarian, Mrs. Haynes, has known me since I was 10. She smiled when she saw me, but didn't ask what I was looking for. I appreciated that. I went to the local history section and poked around until I found a thin binder labeled Health and Epidemics. It was mostly photocopies of old newspaper, articles, and handwritten notes from some high school project years ago. I flipped through until a headline from the 1890s caught my eye. Unusual Measures in Family Burial. The article was fuzzy, but I got the gist. A local family had lost several members to what we'd now call tuberculosis. At the time, they called it consumption. People got thin and pale, coughed, and then went under. Some of the surviving relatives convinced themselves one of the dead was, in their words, feeding on the living. They got permission, if you can call it, that from the town to open the grave. The article described how the body was altered and secured for being reburied in a reinforced coffin. With iron placed over it, it hinted at a removed organ, but the wording was careful, the way old newspapers are when they don't want to be accused of making things up. It mentioned foreign practices and ancient beliefs. At the bottom of the article, Someone had written a note in pen. Years later, caged grave, Lower Hill, opposite old caretaker's house. The handwriting was small and leaned to the right. Next to caretaker's house, there was a little arrow and the words "B House, East Side." Our landlord's last name is Barrett. The mailbox out front says Barrett in faded black stickers. On our lease, the property is listed as Barrett, East Hill, RD. I stared at that note for a long time. It wasn't proof of anything, obviously. It just meant someone, at some point, thought the house across from the lower part of the cemetery was where the caretaker lived. People who watch over the stones. People who close gates and rake leaves. Nothing strange about that. Still, the idea that our sagging porch had been a kind of watch post, facing that one grave with the iron cage, landed in a part of my brain that had been slowly, quietly getting ready for it. It didn't feel like learning something new. It felt like having something confirmed that I'd already half suspected. On my way home, I saw Mr. Godwin again. He was in his driveway, cleaning out his truck. Daisy nosed around near the hedge. I almost kept driving, but I slowed and rolled the window down. "Hey, Mr. Godwin," I called. "Got a minute?" He walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "Sure," he said. "What's up?" I hesitated. Up close, it felt different than rehearsing words in my head. But I'd started, so I kept going. "You've lived here a long time, right?" I asked. "Born here," he said. "Never got smart enough to leave." He smiled a little. "That old grave?" I said, nodding toward the hill. "The one with the iron bars? Do you know anything about it?" His smile faded, not all at once, but like someone turning down a dimmer switch. He glanced toward the cemetery and then back at me. "Why are you asking?" He said. "I was looking at some old town records," I said. "They mentioned a caged coffin and I don't know. It's just across from my window." I was curious. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Daisy sniffed at my car tire and snorted. "People used to get scared of things they didn't understand," he said finally. "Illness. Bad luck." They'd come up with all sorts of arrangements. Made sense to them at the time. Arrangements like caging a grave? I asked. He gave me a short, sharp look, the closest thing to anger I've ever seen from him. "That's old business," he said. "Nothing to do with you?" "I live right across from it," I said. I tried to keep my voice calm. "It feels like it has a little to do with me." He sighed. The sound came out of him slow. It's like air leaving a balloon that's been pinched. "Your place there," he said, nodding toward my house. "Folks used to sit on that porch with lanterns all night during the worst of it. Not because they were scared of the people on the ground, because they were scared of what might not stay there if nobody watched." I swallowed. "You mean the beliefs," I said. "The vampire thing." He winced at the word. "That's a story people tell now," he said. "Gives them something to point to. Makes it sound silly. Back then, they weren't thinking monsters. They were thinking about keeping things in place, keeping lines clear. The living over here, the dead over there." He jerked his chin toward the hill. Simple as that. He started to step back, then stopped and looked at me more carefully. "You been hearing anything?" he asked. "Seeing anything?" I thought about the footprints, the open gate, the light, my name in the dark hallway at 3 a.m, the rattling iron. "No," I said. "Just curious." He watched me for a second too long. Then he nodded. "Well," he said, "curiosity's fine. Just remember, not every grave is what you think it is, and not every burial is about someone who's already gone." Before I could ask what he meant, Daisy tugged on the leash, and he let himself be pulled away, like the conversation had ended somewhere I didn't get to see. That night, I told Evan the broad strokes. I left out the part about waking up at 3:12 and hearing my name. I only said something about the old epidemic and the watch on the house. He whistled. "So we're, like, legacy cemetery guards," he said. "Do we get a discount on property tax?" "We don't pay property tax," I said. "Yet," he said, grinning. Then, more quietly, "You want me to sleep on the couch tonight? Do a night watch? I'll charge overtime." "I'm not scared," I said. It seemed important to say that. We ended up watching TV until too late, both of us half listening for I don't know what. At one point, the porch light clicked on by itself, and we both looked at the window at the same time. Neither of us went to check. Evan just shrugged and turned the volume up a notch. Nothing dramatic has happened since then. That's probably the part that actually sticks with me. No big moment. No screaming, no breaking glass. Just a slow settling of certain facts inside my head. The gate still ends up open in the mornings, sometimes even after I've watched it close the night before. The flowers on the iron grave keep changing, always fresh, always neat. Even when the weather is bad and the ground is too soft for easy walking, the porch light still comes on for no reason and throws our shadows long on the ceiling. Once in a while, I'll wake up and feel that colder air in the living room when I pass the front window on my way to the bathroom. Like I've stepped through a line I can't see. Dogs still bark far away at night. The wind still moves the trees. Insects still go quiet sometimes all at once, and then start up again as if somebody turned a switch. Every now and then, if I'm up too late and the house has settled into that heavy silence, I'll hear the faintest rattle of metal from across the road, just enough to make me pause what I'm doing and listen. I don't try to explain it anymore. I don't call anybody about it. I don't go over there at night. I sit on my porch in the mornings with my coffee and I look at the hill and I just let it be what it is. Whatever it is. I still leave the porch light burning, pointed at the stones. My name is Daniel, and I'm from Derry, Pennsylvania. I rent a little 2-story house on a hill with my sister, Claire. It used to be a single-family place, but the landlord split it a while back, so we have the bottom floor, and some guy named Mark has the upstairs. Claire works nights at the nursing home on the edge of town. I work days at the auto parts store off the highway. We see each other in passing a lot. She comes in when I'm going out. That kind of thing. Breakfast and dinner are almost never at the same time for us. From our front porch, you can see the cemetery right across the road. It's not huge or anything, just an old churchyard that kept spreading out over the years until it sort of became the town cemetery by default. There's a stone wall along the front, waist high, with a metal gate in the middle. The stones inside lean at weird angles, and a lot of them are chipped or half sunk. Someone planted a couple of big maples there probably 50 years ago, and their roots are pushing things around now. When we first moved in, I actually liked the view. It sounds strange, but it felt calm. You'd sit on the porch with a beer at the end of the day, and it was just the trees, the stones, the little gravel paths, and maybe a car going past on the road every 10 minutes. No big city noise, no sirens usually. Sometimes the church bell, but that's it. At night, the streetlight catches the edge of a few headstones, and the rest just disappears into dark. I didn't find it creepy at all at first. Derry is small. We have a grocery store, 2 bars, a diner, a gas station, and then the basic stuff like the post office and the school. The houses crowd closer together in the middle and then drift out into fields and woods. You can smell manure in spring and wet leaves in fall. In summer, it's just hot asphalt and cut grass. People all know each other by sight, if not by name. It's the kind of place where if you drive a different car for a week, someone will ask you what happened to the old one. My days are pretty simple. I open the store some mornings. Other days I close. I know the regulars who come in for oil filters and wiper blades. I know who actually changes their own brakes and who just pretends to. After work, I usually grab something from the diner if I'm too tired to cook. Claire leaves meals in the fridge sometimes, with a note. We share the chores loosely. Trash to the curb, she handles laundry more often than not. That kind of balance? The cemetery was just part of the background. You know how you stop really seeing something after a while? I'd notice if the grass got high, or if the town put up fresh flags for Memorial Day. But that was about it. Only time we really talked about it was when friends came by for the first time. Dude, you live across from a graveyard? My buddy Ryan said the first week we moved in. It's cheaper, I said. Quiet neighbors. Claire rolled her eyes and said he's been waiting to say that. I laughed. And it was true. That's how ordinary it felt. The first weird thing was the gate. There's a chain on it with a simple latch. Nothing fancy. The sign from the township says the cemetery closes at dusk, and technically they're supposed to keep it latched at night. A few weeks after we moved in, I noticed the gate swinging a little, open just a crack, when I left for work at around 7 in the morning. I figured someone had gone through early to walk a dog or something, or the grounds crew forgot to latch it. Then I started seeing it more often. I'd come home from the late shift, pull into the driveway, and there it would be, not wide open or anything, just pulled to one side a little, enough to see the gravel path leading in. The wind does that, I thought. It's on a hill and the wind comes down the road like a straight shot sometimes. One night I was on the porch with Claire before she left for work. It was cool, early fall, and the air smelled like wood smoke from somebody's stove. The porch light kept flickering in this annoying way. I'd already changed the bulb once. "Look at that," she said, pointing across the road. "Didn't you say you latched that when you got home?" I squinted at the gate. It looked closed from where we were. "I did a couple hours ago." "It's not," she said. "See?" When I stared, I saw what she meant. The line of the bars wasn't straight. The gate hung open, maybe an inch. Not much, but enough that the latch wouldn't be fully set. "The wind," I said, "or somebody walking through. There's a cut-through on the other side to Maple Street." She shrugged, but she watched it a little longer than I did. Us. After that, I started to notice small things inside the cemetery too. New flowers on old graves. I don't mean the ones where families visit often. These were on stones with dates from the 1800s. The writing almost gone. Little glass jar with one fresh carnation. Small bunch of wildflowers someone had tied with twine. The rest of the place looked kind of neglected, so it stood out. Must be someone doing some kind of local history project, I thought. The high school or the historical society. It actually seemed kind of nice. Sometimes at night, when I was up watching TV too late, I'd hear what sounded like a voice outside. Not words, just the tone of someone talking low and steady. You know how sound carries weird on cool nights? I'd mute the TV, and it would fade back into wind in the trees, a truck going by, a dog barking somewhere way off. Once or twice I caught myself leaning toward the window, listening, and I'd feel a little stupid. People talk outside. Nothing strange about that. The motion light on the side of the house faces the cemetery too. I put it in because the regular porch light wasn't hitting the driveway right. Every once in a while it would flare on around 2 or 3 in the morning. I'd see the bright white spill across the headstones through the blinds. Usually I didn't get up, just figured it was a cat or a raccoon or Mark coming home upstairs and triggering something by slamming his door. Claire was the one who complained. "It keeps waking me up," she said one morning over coffee. "That stupid light. I swear it turns on when there's nothing there." "Probably a spider on the sensor," I said. "I'll check it." She stared out the window at the cemetery. "Feels like it's watching, not us watching it. You know what I mean?" I didn't. Not really. It was a light. It came on when something moved. It was annoying, but not creepy. Still, I adjusted the sensor. Around that time, I ended up talking to a guy at the township office about the cemetery. Not because of anything weird. I just went in to pay a parking ticket. There was a map on the wall near the counter, a big laminated thing with colored blocks. I realized after a second that it was a plot map for the cemetery. "Hey, that across?" "From Ridge Hill," asked the clerk, just making conversation. He was a gray-haired guy with a name tag that said Jim. He glanced over, then back at his computer. "Yeah, section A and B there, churchyard and newer section." I stepped closer. The map was detailed, little rectangles for graves, numbers and names I couldn't read from where I stood. In one corner, someone had scribbled notes in red pen. A couple of rectangles were circled. One line said "Moved 1923." With a question mark, "Moved," I said, like they moved the whole grave. Jim gave this short, tired laugh. "Sometimes the records say they did. Hard to say if they actually did, though. Old cemeteries." "What's that mean?" I said. He straightened up and snapped the folder he'd been working on shut. "Paperwork gets messy. Families change names, stones break, markers get moved, ground shifts. You know how it is." I didn't, but I nodded anyway. He must have noticed I was still looking, because he added, "They did a cleanup in the 20s one time. Iron fences, Little cages around graves, that kind of thing. People thought it was unsightly. Or unlucky. Depends who you ask. Iron cages, I said. Like to keep people out, supposedly to keep animals off, he said. That's what the records say. Folks back then had other ideas though, I guess. Gave me a tight little smile. Anyway, you're all set on that ticket. Anything else? I said no and left it at that. I told myself he was just one of those small-town guys who likes to make things sound more mysterious than they are. After that conversation, though, I started paying more attention when I walked through the cemetery. The path across from our place cuts straight up the middle, then splits left and right. On the left side, near the back where the ground dips, I noticed a few places where the grass was smoother, like it had been leveled more recently than the rest. No stones, just a slight difference in color, like the soil there had been disturbed at some point. I also found one stone that didn't match up in my memory. It sounds weird to say, but when you look at something almost every day, you get a mental picture. There was this tall, narrow stone near the back wall that I could have sworn was closer to a big maple tree when we moved in. Just by a few feet. Now, it leaned a little closer to the path. To lean to myself, I was misremembering. Trees grow, branches fall, your brain adjusts. Still, it bugged me enough that I mentioned it to Claire. You think the grave moved? She said, smirking while she put on her scrub top. I didn't say that. I said, it's just not where I remember it. Maybe the ground's shifting, she said. Or maybe it's one of those walker spirits. Walker spirits? She laughed. Old lady at the home says some graves never stay put. They walk around, trying to find their real place. I made a face. That doesn't even make sense. Tell that to Mrs. Kowalski, she said, grabbing her keys. She watched one move in 1962, apparently. Both laughed and she headed out. But when the door closed, the house felt a little too quiet. The word walker sat in the back of my mind in a way I didn't like. The small things kept happening. The gate opened a crack. The light flicking on at random hours. Flowers on graves that looked like no one had visited them in decades. Once I saw a small stone, like a river rock, placed on top of a headstone. And then, a few days later, the same kind of stone on a different grave near the front. It almost looked like someone was keeping track of something. Moving the marker along, I kept coming up with explanations. Kids, local history buffs, animals, the wind. Then there were the footsteps. The first time I heard them, it was late, past midnight. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV on low. Some home renovation show was playing. I woke up because something felt... You know that feeling when the atmosphere changes in the room, like the temperature dips just a little? The TV light flickered on the walls, and I was trying to figure out what woke me when I heard it. Gravel, crunching, slow steps. Not right outside the window, but not far either. It sounded like the path across the road. The sound carried clearly in the cool air. Step, crunch, pause, step. I muted the TV and sat there listening. The steps kept coming, steady, going from left to right. They reached the point where the gate is, or where the path meets the front, and then they just stopped. No gate squeak, no car door, nothing. I waited for a minute. Then another. Nothing. Just the refrigerator humming in the kitchen and a dog barking far away. I told myself whoever it was had just cut across to the other street. Maybe they stepped onto the grass, and that's why I couldn't hear it anymore. That made sense. But it didn't quite feel right. A few nights later, it happened again. Same kind of timing. I'd almost fallen asleep on the couch. TV low, air cool. The sound came from outside, a steady crunch of footsteps on gravel. I knew the pattern now. I sat up and listened. They moved along the path, closer to the road, and then stopped. This time I got up and went to the window. I pushed the blinds aside a bit with my fingers. The motion light snapped on, flooding the front yard and the road with white light. The gravel where the path came down from the cemetery looked empty. No person, no dog, nothing. The gate was partway open. I stood there long enough for the light to click off again. I finally made myself let go of the blinds. You're spooking yourself, I said out loud. Hearing my own voice helped a little. You're waking up in the middle of the night and everything sounds weird? The next weekend, Claire and I ended up at the diner for breakfast together, which almost never happens. She had a rare Saturday off, and I was on a late shift. We sat at the counter, picking at eggs and toast. You look like you didn't sleep, she said. Just woke up a couple times, I said. The light again? And footsteps? I said before I could stop myself. She raised an eyebrow. Footsteps. In the cemetery, I said. Probably just somebody cutting through. It's nothing. You're the one who brought it up, she said. She stirred her coffee. You should ask Mark if he's heard anything. The upstairs windows face that way too. I shrugged. He barely says hi. Later that day, though, I did run into Mark in the shared hallway. He was carrying a bag of groceries. I held the door for him. Hey, I said. You hear stuff at night sometimes? From across the road? He blinked. Like what? I don't know, I said. Footsteps. Voices. The motion light going on and off. He hesitated just a second too long. Sometimes, he said finally. I mean, it's an old place. Sound travels. Probably the church, right? There hasn't been a service there in months, I said. Pastor's sick. They've been going to the next town over. Mark shifted the bag in his arms. A box of cereal slid to the top. Yeah, well, he said. Sound still travels. Then he went upstairs without another word. The next small thing happened inside the house. It was a Tuesday, I think. Rainy, cool, that kind of steady drizzle that makes everything smell like wet asphalt and worms. I came home from work, kicked off my shoes on the mat, and walked into the kitchen. There, on the table, right in the middle, was a single dried-up daisy. It wasn't in a vase, just lying there on its side. The stem was bent, and the petals were that papery beige flowers get when they've been dead for a while. It looked like the kind of thing you'd see blowing around in the cemetery in fall. I picked it up between my thumb and finger. There was a tiny bit of dirt clinging to the stem. Claire. I called. No answer. She wasn't supposed to be home. It was her day shift. Still, I checked her room. Empty. The only sound in the house was the rain pattering against the windows. I checked the door. It was locked, chain set just like I'd left it that morning. I checked the back door too. Also locked. No windows open. I laughed once quietly. You probably brought it in on your clothes, I said to myself. It fell out of your jacket or something, landed on the table when you put your keys down earlier. I couldn't explain why that made no sense, but I stuck with it. I threw the flower in the trash. A couple days after that, I walked into the hallway one morning and stopped short. There were muddy footprints on the floorboards. They started just inside the front door. You could see where someone had stepped on the mat, then onto the wood, leaving faint dark marks. They weren't sharp prints, just smudges, but you could see the shape of a heel, the ball of a foot, toes. They went down the hall, toward the living room, and then stopped near the window that faced the cemetery. Seriously? I muttered. I followed them, looking for more. The floor past that point was clean. No prints turning around and going back. It was like the person had walked a few steps in and vanished. I checked my own shoes. They were dry. I hadn't been over there yet that morning. Claire was asleep in her room, door half shut, since she'd worked a double. I knocked lightly and pushed the door open. She was on her side, blanket pulled up, hair a mess. Claire, I said, did you come in with your shoes on? She grunted without opening her eyes. What? There's mud in the hall. Clean it, she mumbled. You're loud. I watched her a second longer. Her hair was dry. There was no way she'd come in 20 minutes ago without me hearing. I went back out, told myself Mark must have tracked in something by mistake and cleaned it up badly. Or maybe the prints were older and I just hadn't noticed. I grabbed a rag and wiped them up. The mud smeared once and then faded. That week, when the rent drop-off was due, I met the landlord's wife, Karen, in the driveway. She was the one who actually collected the checks. We stood by her car, talking about the leak in the upstairs bathroom, the usual stuff. You know anything about the cemetery? I asked, trying to sound casual. She looked across the road and pressed her lips together. What about it? Just the history, I said. Township guy said they moved some graves back in the day, and I keep seeing weird things. Flowers on old stones. Stuff like that. Karen shifted her purse higher on her shoulder. Oh, they're always messing with that place, she said. Church bought extra land, sold some off. Families wanted plots together. They moved markers. You can't trust any of the old maps. Did they actually move the bodies? I said. She laughed, but it sounded forced. You watch too many shows. They probably dug some up. Yeah. But people weren't as careful back then. They didn't always get everything. And half the time, they just changed the paperwork instead. As long as there was a stone with your name somewhere, folks were satisfied. That sounds off, I said. Karen shrugged. It was a long time ago. These old towns are layered. You just live on top of it and try not to think too hard. Has anyone ever said anything weird about this house? I asked, like, noises or footsteps. She hesitated. Her eyes slid up toward the second-floor windows and then back to me. Old houses make sounds, she said. Wind, pipes, critters, mostly pipes, in my experience. Sure, I said. She leaned closer. People like to tell stories, especially about places near cemeteries. If you let that stuff in your head, you'll hear whatever you're looking for. Trust me. Got it, I said. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Anyway, she said, and changed the subject. By then, I'd started to keep a quiet little list in my head. Gate half open, flowers, footsteps, light, daisy on the table, footprints in the hall. None of them were proof of anything. All of them had explanations. If you wanted them, people, wind, mistakes. Versight. Then came the voice. One night Claire was working, and Mark was out. I heard his car leave earlier. The house was just me and the TV again. I had turned in early, around 11, and I was lying in bed scrolling on my phone. Lights off. The window in my room also faces the cemetery, but from a slightly different angle than the living room. You can't see the gate from there, just the tops of some stones and the dark shapes of trees. I must have drifted off without realizing it, because I remember snapping awake to the sound of someone saying my name, Dan. It was close and clear, like the person was right outside the bedroom door. Not shouted, just spoken. The way Claire would say it if she needed me to get up for something. My heart jumped. Yeah, I said. Automatic nothing. Silence. I turned on the bedside lamp. Light pooled over the nightstand and the rumpled blankets. The door was half open the way I'd left it. The hallway beyond was dim. I listened hard. No water running. No footsteps. The house was still. Claire. I called. No answer. I got out of bed, the floor cold under my feet, and checked the hallway. The bathroom, the living room, the kitchen. No one. Both doors were locked. Mark's door upstairs was closed, and I didn't hear anything from his apartment. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, trying to decide if I'd dreamed it. Sometimes you wake up from a dream where someone is talking and the sound seems to linger. That had to be it. I clung to that explanation like a life raft. Still, I slept with the lamp on that night. A few days later, I was going through a box in the hall closet looking for old tax forms when I found a thin folder I didn't recognize. It was shoved behind a pile of manuals. Inside were papers from when the landlord bought the property. Old survey forms, a photocopy of a hand-drawn map, that kind of thing. I sat on the hallway floor and spread the map out. It showed our lot and the churchyard across the road. The lines weren't quite the same as they are now. It looked like the edge of the cemetery used to come farther down toward the street. Our front yard, or at least part of it, must have been part of it, in one corner of the map. In faint pencil, someone had written little notes. Plot numbers, family names. There was a line of text near the lower edge, close to where our front steps would be now. It said, Row 7, adjusted 1924, and then a name. I stared at it for a long time. The last name was mine. Same spelling. Different first initials, but same last name. It's not a rare name around here, I told myself. There were probably different branches of the family. It didn't mean anything. Still, the hair on my arms stood up, and I suddenly felt very aware of the floor under me, the boards, whatever was under the boards, and so on. Later that week, I went back to the township office. I told myself it was to ask about property taxes, but really I just wanted to see that cemetery map again. Jim was there, typing away at his computer. "You again," he said. "What can we do for you?" "I was just curious," I said, "about that map of the cemetery, the one with the notes about graves being moved." He sighed and stood up, walking over to it. "What about it?" I pointed to the corner where I had seen the red circles before. "It says some were moved in 1923. Then I found an old survey at my place that says adjusted 1924 with my last name on it. So," he said, "does that mean," I asked, feeling stupid even as I said it, "that there used to be graves where my house is now?" Jim's eyes flicked toward the window where you could see a sliver of the church roof and the tops of trees. Then he looked back at me. "There used to be graves in a lot of places," he said. "People buried on their own land. Churchyards that spread out and got trimmed back. It's how things go. You dig roads, you put up houses. Sometimes you move people, sometimes you don't." "That's not really an answer," I said. He rubbed his forehead. "Look," he said quietly, "those graves aren't what you think they are." "What does that mean?" "It means the records don't tell the whole story," he said. "Names get reassigned. Stones get reset where it's convenient. Some of those graves on the map were empty. Some of the empty spots weren't. So what's under my front yard?" I asked. He held my gaze for a second, then shook his head. "If you want to sleep, don't go looking," he said. "You hear me?" I swallowed. "Yeah," I said. On the way home, I told myself he was just being dramatic again. Or maybe he really believed that stuff. Either way, nothing had actually changed. The house was the same. The cemetery was the same. It was all the same as the day we moved in. I was just looking at it differently. That night, the wind picked up. You could hear it going through the trees across the road, leaves rattling, branches creaking. The insects went quiet early, which happens sometimes when the temperature drops faster than expected. The motion light kept stuttering on, then off. On, then off. I finally got irritated enough to go out and adjust it again. I opened the front door and stopped. The air on the porch felt colder than it should. Not I can see my breath cold, but sharp. The kind of cold that gets in at the collar of your shirt. I stepped out onto the boards. They creaked under my weight. Across the road, the cemetery was a mess of moving shadows. The trees thrashed a little in the wind. The gate was closed, or at least it looked that way from here. I squinted at it out of habit. Something made me look down. There. On the porch, right next to my feet, were 3 small patches of dried mud. Not full footprints this time. Just where someone might have stepped, paused, and then turned slightly. One near the threshold. One in the middle. One close to the railing that faced the cemetery. I leaned against the doorframe and listened. No gravel crunching. No voices. Just wind and the faint hiss of a truck on the distant highway. You're tracking it in yourself. I said out loud, though there was no mud on my shoes this time either. You're not paying attention. That's all. Bent down, rubbed the spots with my sleeve until they blurred into the gray of the wood, and went back inside. I locked the door. I checked it twice. As I was brushing my teeth later, I heard Claire's voice from the living room. "Hey, Dan," she called. I spat, wiped my mouth. "Yeah." I called back. No answer. I walked into the living room with the toothbrush still in my hand. The TV was off. The couch was empty. Claire's bedroom door was shut, the strip of light under it dark. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I knew that already. But I still went to the window to check. The house felt like it was holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, listening for pipes, for the fridge, for anything. I thought about Jim saying those graves weren't what I think they are. I thought about the survey map with my last name on a row that no longer exists. I thought about the footsteps that stop instead of fade, and the little objects that show up where they don't belong. There is a big difference, I think, between believing in ghosts and noticing patterns. I still don't believe in ghosts. I don't think anything climbed out of the ground across the road and walked into my house. I don't think an old burial can decide it prefers my hallway to its original plot. That's not how anything works. But I also don't have a good explanation for why the gate is more often open than closed, when I can't remember seeing anyone go through, or why the lights on our side keep coming on when the rest of the street stays dark, or why I keep hearing my name spoken in an empty house in a voice that sounds like someone I know. I still go to work. I still pay bills. I still take the trash out and shovel the steps in winter. Life goes on. It has to. The cemetery is just there, across the road, the same as always. The stones lean a little more each year. The trees keep shedding leaves. New plastic flowers appear, faded ones blow away. Cars pass. I've stopped asking questions at the township office. I put the old survey map back in the folder and shoved it behind the other papers in the closet. I didn't throw it away, though. I don't know why. At night, when Claire's at work and Mark is quiet upstairs, I sometimes sit in the living room with the TV off. I listen to the wind, to the insects when they bother to sing, to the silence when they don't. I try not to count the seconds between when the footsteps start and when they stop. I try not to think about where a person would be standing if they walked straight down the gravel path, through the gate, across the road, and up to our front steps. It's probably all just coincidence and bad wiring and old wood. That's what I tell myself anyway. And maybe if I keep repeating it, it'll feel true all the way down. Either way, still keep the porch light on, facing the stones.